Chapter 1188. The sunlight shone on the spacious hall. The varnished floor had a clear texture and a warm yellow luster. In front of the screen, Princess Taiping and her second daughter, who had just returned home, sat across from each other with a relaxed smile on their faces. Along with the mother and daughter's whispering, there was a burst of relaxed laughter. It seemed that children always had to wait until they got married and established a career before they were treated as adults by their parents. This was especially true for the two girls. Their mother, who had always been strict, was now very kind. She held their hands and only talked about daily life. She no longer asked about their studies or scolded them. The housekeeper, Zhou Min, quietly appeared at the door. She took off her shoes and quietly walked in. The sunlight stretched out her shadow and cast it on the table between Princess Taiping and the two girls. Zhou Min was originally a female official in the palace. When Princess Taiping got married, she was sent to the princess's mansion as part of her dowry. From then on, she became Princess Taiping's servant. The time that Princess Taiping spent with her was longer than the time that she spent with her children. Princess Taiping's children never dared to treat this confidant of their mother as an ordinary servant. Seeing her come in, the two girls quickly nodded in greeting. Zhou Min smiled and bowed to second Mississippi. She bent over and whispered a few words in Princess Taiping's ear. Princess Taiping was slightly startled. She then turned to her daughter and said calmly, "I still keep your room for you. Go back to your room and rest for a while. Accompany me for dinner tonight." "Yes, mother." The two girls stood up and bowed to their mother. They then nodded to Zhou Min and quietly left the hall. As soon as the two girls' figures disappeared, Princess Taiping stopped smiling and said to Zhou Min, "Who did you say?" "Li Longji asked to see you." Zhou Min nodded. Princess Taiping's eyes suddenly flashed. She murmured, "Longji, why didn't he become an official in Luzhou? Why did he quietly return to the capital? Doesn't he know that once the news is leaked, it will be tantamount to treason?" Zhou Min said softly, "If Princess does not want to see him, I will send him away." Princess Taiping shook her head. She frowned and thought for a moment. She ordered, "Take him to the small study. Don't disturb others." Zhou Min understood and quietly left the room. Princess Taiping thought for a moment. She waved her sleeves and lightly stood up. She walked to the small study. In Taiji Palace's Qianqiu Hall, Empress Wei was sitting upright. Wei Wen and Zongchuk were kneeling in front of her, discussing the Empress Dowager's memorial. It had been 15 days since the great sage of Great Harmony, the great Zhao Shao Emperor Li Xian, had passed away. The young Emperor Li Zhongmao had ascended to the throne 12 days ago. 12 days were like years for the people of Wei's faction. They couldn't wait for Empress Wei to ascend to the throne. Today, Wei Wen and Zongchuk had come together. These people from the Wei clan were even worse than the people from the Wu clan. They were incapable in both literature and martial arts. Empress Wei's cousin, Wei Wen, knew this in his heart. He wholeheartedly wanted Empress Wei to become the empress, but he was worried that he would not be able to convince the Empress Dowager, so he sought out Zongchuk. Zongchuk and Wei Wen could be said to have hit it off very well, and immediately entered the palace with him to advise. With the two of them echoing each other, Empress Wei, who originally did not have a clear idea, was immediately moved. Empress Wei pondered for a while and said hesitantly, "Zhong Mao has not been emperor for half a month. If Shen rashly moves, will there be an accident?" Zongchuk laughed heartily and said, "Empress Dowager worries too much. Now that the government is in the hands of the Empress Dowager, who in the world can do anything to her?" Wei Wen said, "Yes, at present Wei Jia, Wei Zhuo, Wei Xian, Wei Bo, Wei Qi, Wei Yuan, Gao Song, and Wei Yanxiu are in charge of the various armies. Chong, and it is impregnable. If there is any accident that can happen, it can only be the Prince of Xiang and Taiping. We only need to kill them, and the matter will be settled." Empress Wei frowned and said, "The Prince of Xiang and Taiping are innocent. On what grounds should we kill them? Zongchuk smiled and said, "What is so difficult about this? The sudden death of the Daxing Emperor has caused much discussion among the people. This subject believes that we can use this matter to our advantage. During the funeral of the Daxing Emperor, this subject can arrange for some people to cause trouble." After that, Wei Wen had clearly discussed it with him and immediately said, "After that, we will seize the opportunity to capture the Prince of Xiang and Princess Taiping and execute them on the spot. We will say that they are plotting a rebellion. This subject can also find a few kamikaze soldiers to insist that the death of the Daxing Emperor was the work of the Prince of Xiang and Taiping." Zongchuk said, "As long as the Prince of Xiang and Taiping are dead, the Li clan will have no one left to take charge of the situation. If the Empress Dowager wants the young emperor to abdicate and the world to bear the surname of Wei, wouldn't it be a matter of a single word?" When Empress Wei heard this, she nervously stood up and anxiously paced around the room. Zongchuk and Wei Wen exchanged a look and bowed together. May Empress Dowager follow Empress Wu's story, overthrow the Tang dynasty, and establish the Wei family under the heavens. Empress Wei's expression of nervousness and struggle appeared for a moment before it gradually turned to determination. She slowly stopped and said in a deep voice, "Good. The two of you plan well. Do not make any mistakes. On the day of the late emperor's funeral, this matter will be accomplished." Zongchuk and Wei Wen were wild with joy. They hurriedly bowed their heads and said, "This subject will solemnly obey the empress' decree." The two left excitedly, just as their figures disappeared from the door of the hall. Two people came out from behind the screen. One was sturdy and robust, the other refined and scholarly. It was Ma Chinka and Yang Jun. The two looked at each other and smiled. They cutely bowed to Empress Wei and said, "This subject pays his respects to His Majesty." Empress Wei smiled. Contentedly, she stretched her waist and lazily lay back. Yang Jun had rushed over long ago. Empress Wei happened to be lying on his sturdy and powerful thighs, while Machinka conveniently sat next to Empress Wei. A pair of hands skilled in massage skillfully massaged her plump and supple thighs. Empress Wei's eyebrows immediately lit up with a hint of spring. After Empress Wei seized power, she made Machinka a regular attendant of scattered cavalry and Yang Jun a vice minister of the imperial treasury. In reality, the two of them were just white-collar workers with a salary. They only had one place of work, Empress Wei's brocade couch in her chambers. Perhaps Empress Wei herself did not notice that she had always been learning from Wu Zetian. Not only did she imitate Wu Zetian's methods of seizing power to become the empress, she even deliberately learned from that female empress in how she kept gigolos. Since ancient times, there had never been a female empress in the world. But Wu Zetian had accomplished this groundbreaking event. To those women who were also at the center of power, this magnificent feat was an unprecedented and powerful impact. Empress Wei, Taiping, and Lu, these women who had once crawled at Wu Zetian's feet, trembling with fear or cautious, had unknowingly been infected by this woman who shone like the sun. When Zongchuk returned to his residence, he immediately ordered someone to summon Cui Ryong. In less than 3 incense sticks of time, Cui Ryong arrived on a galloping horse as fast as the wind. This Cui Ryong was a scholar and had initially been appointed as the city officer of Ruwei. During the first year of Dazu, Zongchuk had passed through Shanzhou as the provincial governor. Cui Ryong paid for his meals and asked for delicacies to please him. Zongchuk was very satisfied with his hospitality. After that, Zongchuk recommended him as the Xinfeng officer, and not long after that, he promoted him to the supervising imperial censor. From then on, Cui Ryong became Zongchuk's lackey. He had always been respectful to Zongchuk, like a subject serving a ruler. Now, he was Zongchuk's #1 confidant. Zongchuk's power now dominated the court. Cui Ryong had already been promoted by him to be the assistant minister of the Ministry of War and Xiuwen Library scholar. Chui Ryong hurried to the small study and saw Zong Chuk writing furiously. Even though he did not know what he was writing, his face was flushed and he seemed unusually excited. Even though Chui Ryong was the assistant minister of the Ministry of War and had high status and power, he was unusually respectful in front of Zong Chuk. He did not dare to sit down, nor did he dare to be startled. He only cupped his hands and stood there with a slight bow. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Zong Chuk finally finished writing. He blew on it lightly and folded it carefully. "Ryong, you've come." Zong Chuk seemed to have only just noticed Chui Ryong and very intimately greeted him. In truth, he had long since known that Chui Ryong had come, but this was precisely the feeling he wanted. Blindly being courteous to the wise and humble would not do. In his view, the way to govern was to balance kindness and authority. Even though Chui Ryong was already the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, a disciple would always have the awareness of being a disciple. Chui Ryong respectfully bowed. This disciple pays his respects to Sir Zong. Zong Chuk chuckled. "Sit. There's no need to stand on ceremony between us." Chui Ryong respectfully sat down, but a moment later he jumped up in fright. He had heard a shocking piece of news from Zong Chuk's mouth. Empress Wei wants to use the occasion of Emperor Xian's funeral to kill the Prince of Xiang and Princess Taiping. But this was not the most shocking news. What truly alarmed him was that after Empress Wei captured the Prince of Xiang and Princess Taiping and executed them on charges of rebellion and murdering Emperor Xian, Zong Chuk wanted to launch a surprise attack, kidnap the young emperor, and exterminate the Wei faction. He wanted to borrow the hands of the Wei clan to kill the Prince of Xiang and Princess Taiping, and then kill all the high-ranking officials of the Wei clan who would inevitably be present in the name of a loyal minister who set things right. He would then kidnap the young emperor as a puppet and wield both civil and military power, all the way until he seized the country and made the world his surname. This, Chui Ryong's forehead instantly beaded with sweat, each bead the size of a soybean. Zong Chuk coldly glanced at him. "What are you afraid?" Chui Ryong swallowed with difficulty and said bitterly, "Everything this disciple has was given by Sir Zong. This disciple will not hesitate to go through fire and water for Sir Zong. It's just that although this disciple is the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, the number of soldiers I can mobilize is limited. I'm afraid I'll fail Sir Zong's expectations." Zong Chuk chuckled and comforted him. "You don't have to worry about this." Zong Chuk raised his eyes and gazed at the emptiness in front of him. He leisurely said, "You're not the only soldier this Zong can use. Don't forget, this Zong is Emperor Zetian's nephew. Those people of the Wu clan and I are all cousins." Chui Ryong's body trembled as he involuntarily said, "Sir Zong is saying." Zong Chuk said, "Correct. Ever since Li Zhongjuan rebelled and killed Liang Wangu and Wu Sanxi, the Wu clan has been like a group of dragons without a leader and has declined day by day. But the Wu clan's foundation of many years will not fall so quickly. The Wu clan and the Li clan have many marriages. If the Li clan rules the country, the Wu clan can still live. But once the world takes the surname Wei, the Li clan will undoubtedly be finished. But will the Wu clan have any good days? They are also worried. At present, many of the generals in the army came from the Wei clan. But what foundation did these people have to speak of? It's not that this Zong is arrogant, but the Wu clan has commanded the North Gate Imperial Army for many years. I dare not say that I can mobilize the entire Imperial Army, but it's easy to pull out a troop from among them. If we want to win in the chaos, we only need an opportunity." Zong Chuk stroked his beard, his eyes gradually revealing a crazed glint. "When I first became a lowly person, I was eager to be the Prime Minister. Now that I'm the Prime Minister, I'm only one step away from becoming the Emperor. With this opportunity, how can I not want to be the Emperor? As a man, even if I have to face the South and only have one day to live, it's still better than dying a mediocre death." Chapter 1189. After Li Longji left Princess Taiping's residence, Princess Taiping paced back and forth alone in her study for a long time. Only then did she have someone invite Sir Mo and explain Li Longji's purpose in coming here. Mo, Yuhan cheerfully said, "It seems that your highness is not the only one sharpening the blade of the Wei clan and realizing that a great disaster is imminent. This Li Sanlang is a shrewd man, but why did he not consult with the Prince of Xiang, but come to seek your highness's help?" Princess Taiping bitterly smiled. "That elder brother of mine is like a woman, kind and soft-spoken. If I tell him this matter, I'm afraid it will only ruin things." But Taiping slightly narrowed her eyes and said appreciatively, "But Sanlang actually secretly returned from Luzhou. This lone master's Thro is truly a ruthless character." Mo Yuhan deeply agreed and nodded. Able to rise and fall, resolute, shrewd, and capable. If this sort of person is our opponent, then we must be very careful. Taiping smiled brightly. He has 2 elder brothers above him, and he is not a legitimate son. He will not get in the way. Mo Yuhan asked, "What if he obtains the merit of the country?" Princess Taiping confidently said, "So he came here because he wanted me to persuade his father at the crucial moment. But I want to participate in the entire process. If I fail, I will die with him. If I succeed as his aunt, I will naturally take the greatest credit." By the Longqing pool, a green-robed scribe strolled with his hands clasped behind his back. His steps were slow and restless, as if he was a scribe's relaxing by the lake. Only when one got closer could one see his tightly furrowed brow and anxious face. This person was none other than Cui Riong. It was true that he was the Ah-Fu Sex Chuk, but his goal was to rely on a large tree for shade. He had never imagined that Zong Chuk could become emperor. When Zong Chuk told him of his grand dream, Cui Riong's only thought was, "Zong Chuk has gone mad." Cui Riong did not want to accompany Zong Chuk in his madness, much less accompany him in death. This large tree was about to become a blazing torch, and every moth that approached it would be burned to ashes. It was time to seek refuge with a wise master. Cui Riong pondered for a long time and came to the conclusion that if he wanted to expose Zong Chuk's scheme, he could only choose Wei clan or Li clan. Between Madame Wei and Madame Li, after weighing the pros and cons, he gradually leaned towards Madame Li. Although Zong Chuk was an important member of the Wei faction, he was Zong Chuk's trusted aide. In order to avoid arousing Zong Chuk's suspicions, he did not have much interaction with the other members of the Wei faction. He was completely dependent on Zong Chuk alone. But before that, his relationship with the Li family was quite harmonious. This was because he was only promoted by Zong Chuk after the first year of Dazu. But how did the first year of Dazu come about? That was a trick played by Yang Fan. That year, Yang Fan was ordered by Wu Zetian to secretly sneak into Fangzhou to rescue the Prince of Luling. In Fangzhou, he was imprisoned for trifling matters. In order to escape without exposing their identities, they fabricated the story of the golden armor deity and forged a huge footprint. The local authorities submitted this matter to the imperial court. Wu Zetian believed it to be an auspicious omen, so the following year, the name of the year was changed to Dazu. At the time, Wu Zetian had already decided to make her son Li Xian heir apparent, and the political situation of Li Tang's imperial clan began to improve. The entire world knew that the next emperor would assuredly come from the Li family. In this sort of environment, Cui Riong naturally had some close dealings with Li Tang's imperial clan, and Li Xian, who had just returned from Fangzhou and been made crown prince, was extremely cautious in his conduct, fearing that he might make a mistake. Thus, the one who represented Li Tang's imperial clan in interacting with the nobles was the Prince of Xiang, so Cui Riong was most familiar with the Prince of Xiang. Moreover, Cui Riong was a scholar and had studied the books of the sages since he was a child. He had a very strong sense of orthodoxy, and he had always believed that Li Tang was the true orthodoxy. Although he was Zong Chuk's disciple when he first submitted to Zong Chuk, Zong Chuk had no intention of rebelling. Now that Zongchuk was coveting the throne, he had no choice but to make a choice. For these reasons, and because he was in the Bureau of Military Personnel, he was well aware that the Wei clan could not win the morale of the army, so he ultimately chose the Li clan. He wanted to report this news to the Prince of Xiang, but he did not dare to go to the Prince of Xiang's estate. The Prince of Xiang was too big of a target, and there was probably already someone watching him. Thus, Cui Riong chose the Prince of Xiang's eldest son, Li Qingqi. But when he reached the estate of the Prince of Shouchuan, Li Qingqi, he couldn't help but hesitate. Advance or retreat, as long as he made the wrong choice, it could be a calamity. How could Cui Riong not be conflicted? He paced back and forth for more than 2 hours before stamping his feet and walking to the gate of the estate. Ever since Li Xian's death, the Wei clan had grown increasingly rampant. In order to avoid trouble, Li Qingqi had spent the last few days in seclusion. When Cui Riong arrived, he immediately sought him out. Upon hearing Cui Riong's reason for coming, Li Qingqi couldn't help but pale in fright. After sending off Cui Riong with endless gratitude, he immediately returned to the inner residence to find Li Longji. Ever since Li Longji had secretly returned to the capital, he had been living in his estate. Li Longji was also stunned by his big brother's explanation. Although he had long known that once Wei Empress stabilized the political situation, she would inevitably move against the Li clan, he had not expected the Wei party to move so quickly. Even more surprising to Li Longji was that the Wei clan's #1 thug, Zongchuk, was actually so ambitious. Although Zongchuk's plan sounded very absurd upon careful thought, it was not impossible for it to succeed. If Empress Wei used the crime of murdering Empress Yan and executed the Prince of Xiang and Princess Taiping on the spot, while the hearts of the people were wavering, Zongchuk suddenly emerged as a new force and reversed the verdict for Li Tang's imperial clan, capturing the Wei party in one fell swoop and controlling the young son of heaven, Li Zhomao. Then, when he thought of the pros and cons, Li Longji couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. His big brother, Li Qingqi's estate, was next to Yang Fan's. Li Longji wanted nothing more than to immediately climb over the wall and tell Yang Fan of this astonishing news. Fortunately, at this moment, he still remembered Yang Fan's warning. No matter how urgent it is, you must meet at Yuzhen Temple. A ruler who is not secretive will lose his subject, and a subject who is not secretive will lose himself. Anything that is not secretive will lead to harm. Sen Lang must remember this. Li Longji did not know that Yang Fan was warning him like this because there was a traitor at Yang Fan's side and that Yang Fan did not want to uncover the traitor too soon, so he was warning him like this. However, Li Longji strictly abided by this promise. Li Longji immediately disguised himself and hurried to Yuzhen Temple. Very quickly, a beautiful Taoist nun from Yuzhen Temple came out and rode an ox cart to Yang Fan's estate. When the news was delivered to the rear residence, Yang Fan was holding his second son Yang Ji's hand and teaching him how to write. When he heard that someone from Yuzhen Temple had come to invite him, Yang Fan knew that something big must have happened. He quickly handed his son over to Anu and hurried to Yuzhen Temple. In Yuzhen Temple, Li Longji was restless. When Princess Yuzhen saw this, she asked him about the inside story. Li Longji did not hide it and told his sister the truth. Princess Yuzhen was also burning with anxiety. After an unknown amount of time, Yang Fan finally arrived. Princess Yuzhen was aware of the urgency of the matter. Even though after she revealed her true feelings that day, Yang Fan did not avoid her visit for several days in a row, causing her to feel rather resentful. But right now it was not appropriate for her to talk about her love affair. Hastily, she invited Yang Fan into the quiet room. Li Longji told Yang Fan about the matter. Yang Fan was surprised and said, "Zongchuk? I really did not expect him to have such ambitions. There is also the Wu clan. They are unwilling to be left out." When Li Longji saw that Yang Fan was calm and composed, he couldn't help but ask, curiously, "Doesn't Erlang think that this matter is urgent?" Yang Fan glanced at him. From his face full of heroic spirit, It was as if he saw himself from 10 years ago. Yang Fan smiled and said, "Although the matter is urgent, we cannot be anxious. The more anxious we are, the easier it is to make mistakes." Li Longji said in admiration, "Longji has learned something. Erlang is the one who is capable of great things." Yang Fan shook his head and said, "If it was 10 years ago, I might have been even more impulsive than you. If you had experienced a few life and death situations, you would naturally be able to calm down." Yang Fan knocked on the table thoughtfully. After a moment of silence, he raised his eyes and said, "We were originally going to take action. We are just one step ahead of time. There is no need to panic. 3 days later, we will make the first move." A smear of redness quickly spread to Li Longji's face. Li Longji clenched his fists and said excitedly, "I was waiting for you to say this. Then, let's make an appointment to fight to the death 3 days later." Yang Fan pressed hard on Li Longji's tender shoulders and said in a deep voice, "The net is going to be broken. We cannot die. The news must not be leaked. Wait until the day of the uprising, then inform them." Li Longji was stunned and said, "Don't we need to let the people prepare in advance?" Yang Fan said, "What should we let them prepare? The first spurt of energy, the second decline, and the third exhaustion. A life and death struggle. Victory or defeat is fated. That is all." Li Longji pondered over the sentence and nodded lightly. When Yang Fan walked out of the quiet room, he saw Li Qiang sitting there in a daze with a zither on her knees. Her fingers were on the strings, and she seemed to be thinking about something. Yang Fan looked at her deeply. In the end, he pursed his lips and strode towards the door. "Erlang." Li Qiang suddenly woke up and hurriedly called out to him. Yang Fan stopped and turned around to look at her. Li Qiang gazed deeply at him, her beautiful eyes quickly overflowing with a layer of mist. "Erlang, take care." Yang Fan looked at her and slowly revealed a bright smile. He opened the door and walked out. In the dark of the night, in a small building in the backyard of the Yang residence, Yang Fan was wearing thin clothes and quietly leaning against the railing of the building, bathing in the frosty moonlight. Wan slowly walked over. She was wearing a soft and elegant snow-white robe. Her beautiful hair draped over her shoulders, and her snow-white feet were bare. She was like a fairy condensed from the moonlight. She walked to Yang Fan's side and draped a robe over Yang Fan's shoulders. She said softly, "It's cold at night." Yang Fan tightened the robe and turned his head to look at Wan. The cold moonlight shone on Wan Er's beautiful face. Her eyes were shining like stars. Yang Fan gently held her hand. Her hand was like soft jade, warm and smooth. Yang Fan said in a low voice, "Wan make arrangements. That night in 3 days, you must be on duty in the palace." And Wan first frowned in confusion. Then her eyes slowly widened. Her gaze became nervous and excited. She held Yang Fan's hand tightly and said excitedly, "In 3 days, we are going to do something." Yang Fan opened his arms and gently embraced her. He looked up at the bright moon in the sky and said softly, "In 3 days, no matter whether we succeed or fail, you will no longer be a bird in a cage." In the faint clouds and the bright moon, a large bird flew out of nowhere. It silently stretched its wings, as if it had grown a pair of wings for the bright moon. Chapter 1190. At the foot of Mount Li, there was a huge indoor hot spring. This building was built according to the topography of the mountain. Half of the walls were made of mountain rock, and the other half was made of wood. Vines and ferns that liked warm and humid environments grew luxuriantly, and there were even colorful flowers blooming in the center. A hot spring was surrounded by an irregular pool of mountain rock. The water was extremely clear, but the surface was enshrouded in mist. A young girl's laughter could be heard from the mist, but it stopped abruptly. A beautiful girl covered her mouth as she walked out of the mist. She moved very slowly, as if afraid of causing a splash. Soon after, another beautiful girl appeared. She was also covering her mouth, but her eyes were smiling as she quietly moved out. They were both around 16 or 17 years old, with bright eyes and white teeth. Most importantly, their slightly immature yet curvaceous and alluring bodies were completely naked. A man came out of the mist with his hands wide open. His eyes were covered with a black silk scarf that was slightly wider than his forehead. He pounced to the left and slashed to the right. The surging pool water surged endlessly, and the white mist spread out, making the attractive bodies of the two girls even more vaguely visible. Suddenly, the man seemed to hear something. He tilted his head to listen and then moved in a certain direction. Just as he took a few steps, he suddenly let out a loud roar and charged forward, his hand wrapped in a surging wave. "Ha! I've caught you. Let's see where you can run to now." The blindfolded man laughed proudly, but he soon realized something was wrong. He clenched his hand and felt that he was grabbing a boot. He hurriedly took off his blindfold and saw that it was a deerskin boot. The owner of the deerskin boots was a pretty and lovely girl. She stood beside the hot spring and looked to be about 16 or 17 years old. Her clothes were neat and tidy, and her green outfit made her look even more valiant and formidable. The man who had taken off his blindfold was Shinmu. Upon seeing this girl, Shinmu couldn't help but smile. "What? Gaia also wants to play hide-and-seek with me. Then why aren't you taking off your clothes?" The pretty girl blushed as she bowed and said, "Master, Jean Eyre has something important to discuss with you." Jean Eyre? Shinmu's lustful eyes immediately became clear. Jean Eyre was one of his secret guards. Shinmu had once given an order to the people around him. If Jean Eyre requests an audience, no matter when, you must report to him immediately. This was because Jean Eyre had a name that only he knew. Gouda! Shenmu walked out of the spring with a splash. On his third step, Gaia had already draped a large bath towel over his shoulders. Shinmu met Gouda in a small room outside. The room was very transparent, and there was a skylight at the top. The light was soft and bright, and there was a sliding door in front of him. The door was open, and what he saw was the dense forest on the other side. Shinmu was wrapped in a large bath towel and lying on a bamboo chair. Only when Shinmu was left in the reception room did Gouda pull down the green cloth covering his face. He took out a letter from his sleeve and presented it to Shinmu with both hands. Shinmu took the letter and examined the wax. He tore open the seal and took out the letter to read. Suddenly, he straightened his back and sat up. The bamboo chair under him creaked. "Erlang wants to clean the grass and kill the rabbit. Let's get rid of them all at once." Shinmu stood up and walked to the door with the letter. The bright sunlight shone on him and his eyes were shining. Shinmu stared at the mountains on the other side. No one knew what he was thinking. The silent mountains faced him and seemed to be silently observing him. After a while, Shinmu suddenly turned around and said to Gouda in a deep voice, "You reply to Erlang. I will do my best to cooperate." On the high mound where the Yang family planted precious flowers and plants, there was a pentagonal pavilion facing the Longqing Lake. Standing in the pavilion, one could see the beautiful scenery of the Longqing Lake. At this moment, Yang Fan and Ren Wei were standing in the pavilion, one in front and one behind. Yang Fan had his hands behind his back and looked at the misty lake. Ren Wei stood behind him with his hands hanging down, one in front and one at the back, one with his hands behind his back and the other with his hands hanging down. It was clear who was the superior. The situation in the imperial court is getting worse and worse. Yang Fan said, "I see that Empress Wei has the intention to imitate Emperor Zetian. Once she ascends to the throne, she will definitely start with a massacre. She will get rid of Li Tang's imperial clansmen and loyal subjects. She will use the butcher's knife to establish her prowess in the world. When that time comes, I don't know how many people will be implicated. Fortunately, I have decided to stay out of this. However, it is inevitable that I will be implicated if I stay here. I have decided to resign from the Imperial Court and leave the Imperial Court completely. I will no longer be associated with any of the factions." Yang Fan turned his head and said to Renwei, "Immediately send out my orders. Order the southern border, Lu Province, and Hebei to immediately launch an attack on all the hidden sects factions that have been investigated, no matter if it is a commercial war, using military force, or borrowing the power of the local authorities. In short, devour their factions, eliminate their manpower, and make them disappear completely." Ren Wei's heart shook, and his eyes suddenly revealed an excited expression. The sect patriarch had been accumulating power for a long time and finally decided to declare war on the hidden sect. Furthermore, this time, there wasn't even a probing attack. Once he made his move, it would be a killing blow that would leave no one behind. Ren Wei nervously swallowed his saliva and replied cheerfully, "Yes, this subordinate will do it immediately." Yang Fan turned his body completely and stared at him. He smiled and said, "The first place we will make our move will be Chang'an City. 2 days later, we will mobilize all our forces in Chang and assassinate the important figures of the hidden sect during the night." Yang Fan said, "I know it won't be easy to assassinate their important figures, but you must do it at all costs. As long as we can eliminate 30% of their important figures that are hiding in Chang, and we will have the absolute advantage in this decisive battle." This subordinate understands. Ren Wei used a powerful voice to reply, "The hidden sect has been rampant for a long time, and the sect patriarch is finally willing to retaliate. This action is very satisfying. I believe the entire sect will do their best. This battle will make the hidden sect submit to us. And this battle must be fought beautifully. Take it as a welcome gift from me, who is preparing to step into the pugilistic world." "Ha-ha!" Yang Fan laughed, and so did Rinwei. "Ha-ha!" At the foot of Mount Zhongnan there was a clear lake. In the center of the lake, there was a small island that looked like a green snail. The island was covered in lush greenery, and there was a rugged and strange rock at the side of the island. Lu Binji was fishing on the strange rock when he suddenly received a secret letter from his subordinate. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. The fishing rod fell into the water and was dragged far away by a fat fish that bit the hook. It drew a white water line on the surface of the water, but Lu Binji didn't even take a look. He laughed crazily for a long time and suddenly burst into tears. "I have waited for it. I have finally waited for it." Lu Binji clutched the letter tightly and knelt on the ground as he cried loudly. When the guard that reported the news saw the sect patriarch kneeling down, he quickly took a few steps back and knelt on the ground. Lu Binji slowly lifted his head and looked at the undulating mountain range in the distance. His face was so distorted that it was terrifying. He gritted his teeth and said, "Big brother, I have painstakingly worked hard. I gave up the position of the clan patriarch and secretly accumulated my strength. I have waited patiently for so long. I have watched him being glorious and proud. Finally, this day has arrived. Everything that they took away from your hands, I want to take it back. I want Shenmu and Yang Fan to die with everlasting regrets. Not only am I going to grind their bones into ashes, but I am also going to make their wives, concubines, and children be my Lu clan servants for generations to come." Ha! Lu Binji let out a series of crazy laughter, which caused the guard that knelt on the ground to shiver. Lu Binji suddenly turned around on his knees. His back was arched, and his 4 limbs were on the ground. He looked like a wolf that was about to pounce and devour someone. His blood-red eyes stared fiercely at the terrified guard. He sternly ordered, "Immediately activate all the hidden forces we have hidden. We will take advantage of the obvious and hidden sects' mutual destruction to annihilate them in one fell swoop." The Yang residence was located at the Longqing Pond with the best scenery. The beautiful Longqing Pond was less than 100 feet away from the entrance of the Yang residence. There was a row of weeping willows beside the lake, and the shallow water area was a large lotus canal. Not only was the scenery elegant, but there were also a large number of fish in the water. It was a good place for fishing. There were a few fishermen by the lake, and they were all very familiar with Rinwei. Those who often fished here had their own habitual spots. Rinwei's fishing spot was under an old willow tree that was at least 50 years old. This weeping willow was very close to the lake. The lake water surged and lapped against the shore. After a long time, half of the weeping willow's roots were exposed. As a result, the roots that were submerged under the water grew many red roots with many small shrimps growing inside. There was a protruding burl on the upper half of the root, which was shaped like a stump. It was suitable to lean against the weeping willow and sit on it to fish. That afternoon, Renwei came to the lake again. There were already 2 old men wearing bamboo hats sitting there with fishing rods in their hands. When they saw him, they warmly greeted him before turning their attention back to their fishing bobbing. Renwei sat down at his familiar spot and skillfully hung the bait. He cast the hook and watched the bobbing gently on the clear water surface. He lazily leaned against the willow tree trunk and said with a smile, "Uncle Wu, your 6th Lang is about to get married. Why is he still so carefree?" One of the fishermen stroked his beard and said with a smile, "This old man has 6 sons and 2 daughters. Now that my youngest son is about to get married, he can just ask his elder brothers and sisters to manage for him. Does this old man still need to worry about them?" As Rinwei and the fisherman chatted and laughed, Renwei's left hand quietly reached for the thick root of the tree. There was a hole about the size of a fist on the ground. Renwei put 2 fingers in and quickly felt around. A square, folded piece of paper fell into his palm. This movement was extremely secretive and no one had noticed it. Even if someone was sitting right next to him and saw his movement, they could only think that he had touched the ground with his hands because of the cover of his sleeves. No one would deliberately explore this kind of tree hole. Even a mischievous child would be worried that there might be insects or mosquitoes inside. Moreover, the piece of paper wasn't stuffed into the tree hole, but nailed to the upper edge of the inside of the tree hole. Renwei calmly stuffed the piece of paper into his belt. He didn't leave immediately, but patiently continued to chat and laugh with his fishing friends. After about 2 hours, Renwei picked up a basket of fat fish and leisurely walked back to the Yang estate. Just as Renwei entered the gates of the Yang estate, he saw Gu-Er bustling out from the western courtyard. The moment he saw Renwei, he smiled and said, "Brother Rin, you're back. I was just about to look for you. Ah Lang has summoned us to meet in the study." When Renwei heard this, he passed the fish basket to Mensi and smiled. "I'll give it to you. Go and stew a bowl of fish soup." Then he ignored Mensi's repeated thanks and followed Gu-Er to the study. As the 2 walked, Gu-Er lowered his voice and laughed. "Tonight is the time for us to launch an all-out attack on the hidden sect. I didn't expect Brother Rin to still be in the mood to fish. You're so calm in the face of danger. You truly have the demeanor of a great general." Renwei smiled. "Brother Gu is flattering me. I just like to relax my body and mind by fishing. Sect Master often says that the more important a matter is, the calmer one must be. Right now, I'm trying my best to cultivate my composure. However, I'm still far from being able to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of me." As the 2 chatted and laughed, they arrived in front of the study. They saw Guda, Gusan, and Guzhang standing solemnly in front of the study. Renwei didn't expect that even Guzhang would be mobilized for tonight's operation. When he saw that Guzhang was here, Renwei hurriedly cupped his hands in greeting. Renwei cupped his hands, but before he could say anything, he heard Gu-Er laugh and say, "That's right. Betraying your master's kindness and forsaking righteousness for the sake of profit. After doing such a thing, Brother Rin should indeed be nervous." Before he finished speaking, Gu Zhang's expression darkened. He pointed his single arm at Renwei and shouted sternly, "Take him down!" Guda and Gu San moved to the left and right as their hands pressed onto the hilt of their swords. Renwei was already shocked after hearing Gu-Er's words. Just as he was about to make a move, he felt his back tighten as a sharp sword was already pressed against his back. Chapter 1191. When Renwei was brought into the study, his expression was extremely unsightly. None of the three Gu brothers were inferior to him in terms of martial arts. With the three brothers surrounding him, he had no way of retaliating. Not to mention, there was also Gu Zhang by their side. Renwei could only wait helplessly. A short rope made from Gu Er's ox tendon tied his hands behind his back. He could still walk as he pleased, and with just his legs, not even a dozen strong men would be able to get close to him. However, no one in this study was an ordinary strong man, especially Yang Fan. Renwei was well aware of how profound Yang Fan's martial arts were. Even if Yang Fan were to fight barehanded, he would still be no match for Yang Fan even if he had the most suitable weapon in his hands. Yang Fan sat behind the desk. His expression was calm, and his gaze was deep. When he stared at Renwei, he didn't seem any different from before. When Renwei's gaze met Yang Fan's, a hint of shame flashed across his eyes. He lowered his head, then slowly raised it again after a while. He smiled bitterly at Yang Fan and said, "In the end, I still underestimated Sect Master. May I ask when Sect Master discovered this?" Yang Fan replied, "On Mount Zhongnan, when you suddenly made a move and killed Li Qingquang." Ren Wei's gaze flickered as he muttered, "It was a long time ago. So early, you discovered it?" Yang Fan shook his head. "At the time, I was only suspicious of you. You were so impulsive, unlike your usual personality. Besides, you are someone close to me. Even if you were pressured by the elders of the sect, it at least proves that someone in the sect is secretly contacting you, right? In reality, I did suspect that there were elders in the sect who were dissatisfied with me. That was why I bribed you, hoping to force me to accept something and make me their puppet." When Renwei heard this, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He understood one thing. Not only did Yang Fan know that he was a spy planted by someone else, he even knew who that person was. But how could Yang Fan kill Li Qingquang with a single slash? This person's schemes were a little too deep and frightening. Renwei recalled the scene of the soldiers searching for the crown prince on Mount Zhongnan that day. He sighed and said, "I killed Li Qingquang and committed a grave mistake." Li Qingquang had actually been ordered by that person to kill the crown prince and use the crown prince's head as a token of allegiance so that he could attach himself to the emperor. Unfortunately, this was that person's impromptu decision. I didn't know. I only knew that Li Qingquang was that person's confidant. I didn't know how much Li Qingquang knew about me. Did he know that I was also that person's man? Since I had submitted to that person, I had to work for him, right? If Li Qingquang had truly submitted to the court, I didn't know if he would reveal more secrets. "You're so sure that I'm a traitor?" Yang Fan said, "It's just a suspicion. So I asked Shenmu to put on another show. I told you about this in advance and asked me to arrange the guards. I knew that Shenmu and I would do such a big thing, and you would definitely report it to that person." Yang Fan's voice paused, then he sneered, "That Lu Bingji who hides his head but shows his tail. I sent people to keep an eye on you and finally found out his background. Not bad. I always thought he was a good-for-nothing, hedonistic son. I didn't expect him to have the demeanor of a brother." Ren Wei's expression froze. He stared at Yang Fan for a long time before realization dawned on him. He couldn't help but reveal a terrified expression. He cried out involuntarily. Sovereign meeting with young Master Shin at Wuzhong Plains was originally a means to draw out the person behind me. Yang Fan smiled and nodded. Ren Wei blurted out, "Then Sovereign and Shenmu's public falling out is actually also—" Yang Fan was still nodding, his movements very elegant. Ren Wei's face was pale. If he was said to be afraid at the beginning, then when faced with reality, he began to accept his fate. But now, he knew that Shenmu had long discovered his identity and was toying with him in the palm of their hands. On top of that, he was still complacent and had been hiding by Yang Fan's side this entire time. All that was left was a great humiliation. At this moment, Gu-er stepped forward and handed the small piece of paper that Runway had yet to open to Yang Fan. "Sovereign, we found this on his body." Yang Fan reached out and took it. He opened it and took a look, then smiled at Rinwei and asked, "Do you want to know what Lu Binji instructed you to do?" Rinwei shook his head, dejectedly. There was no longer any need for him to know about these things. Yang Fan gently tossed the piece of paper into the air, allowing it to slowly fall. He smiled at Rinwei and said, "I'm not sure how big Lu Binji's business has been these past few years, but after tonight, all of his forces should be exposed." The falling piece of paper cut off their line of sight, but Yang Fan's voice still rang in his ears. "So, they're like clams lying on the surface of a lake that's been drained of water. All I have to do is pick them up one by one in advance." Rinwei closed his eyes in pain. He could hear Yang Fan asking, "Why did you betray me? What did Lu Binji promise you?" Rinwei shut his mouth tightly and shook his head vigorously. Money, status, power, or beauty, these were all the things that could move him. However, none of them held any meaning right now. Yang Fan let out a deep sigh and said, "Go in peace. Very soon they will be accompanying you." In the back garden of the Princess Taiping's estate, a dozen or so imperial bodyguards stood in the courtyard. They were all dressed in hunting attire and equipped with bows and swords. Because Xue Chongjian held the position of Wei Minister, he was dressed in martial attire. He was still a youth of 17 or 18 years of age. However, because of his tall stature, he looked like an adult man. It was just that his appearance was slightly tender. Princess Taiping tightened the silk ribbons on his armor to conceal the nervousness in her heart. She looked at her son's face, which was 70% similar to her late husband Shuaishao's, and said in a low voice, "Jian, you have to be extra careful this time. Remember, you are a general, a commander-in-chief. Your role is to command and dispatch troops. You must not go into battle carelessly." Xue Chongjian smiled in high spirits and said, "Mother, don't worry. I will be careful. However, if I need to go into battle, I will still go into battle. This isn't a confrontation between two armies. If we succeed, the matter will be settled. If we fail, we will inevitably die. Mother, why do you need to worry?" When Princess Taiping heard such inauspicious words, she couldn't help but frown and felt slightly annoyed. A bodyguard in hunting attire beside her hurriedly replied, "Aunt, don't worry. Your nephew will watch over Chongjian and won't let him act recklessly." This bodyguard in hunting attire had a jade-like face and two heroic eyebrows. It was Li Longji who was dressed as a bodyguard. Princess Taiping nodded at him and said resolutely, "You go now." She then turned around and hurriedly walked away. Li Longji made a hand signal to Xue Chongjian. The group of people led their horses out of the corner door. Once out of the corner door, they all mounted their horses and galloped along the long alley. Princess Taiping hurriedly walked until she reached a fake mountain. She suddenly stopped and looked back. She saw her son and Li Longji leading a dozen or so bodyguards out of the courtyard without looking back. Taiping couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Mo Yuhan quietly came out from behind the fake mountain. Princess Taiping heard his footsteps but didn't turn around. She was still staring at the place where her son disappeared. She said indifferently, "Mr. Mo, don't worry. Since I have already made up my mind, I won't hesitate." Her voice was very light, but her tone was unusually firm. If there was someone who had seen the middle-aged Wu Zetian here, he would be surprised to find that the current Princess Taiping not only looked like Wu Zetian at that time, but even her calm and resolute eyes were exactly the same. Mo Yuhan could hear the sincerity in Princess Taiping's words. Her uneasy expression gradually disappeared. If a superior had a decision, his subordinates wouldn't be afraid of his increasing ambition because the greater the risk, the greater the reward. Since they had already followed him on this road of no return, they wouldn't be afraid of him going higher and further. But if you were hesitant and indecisive, it would be a taboo for a commander. Don't expect your subordinates to accept all your decisions without complaint or regret. When they had already risked their lives to follow you, your retreat and hesitation would make them incomparably angry. Do you want to give up your life? Who knows what will happen in the future? Who knows if there will be a day when the things you have already done will be revealed? In order to protect themselves, everyone would have to kill you. Otherwise, they would have to use the fait accompli to force you to submit. This kind of thing had happened before and would happen in the future. No matter how human beings developed, as long as their desires were still there, this kind of thing would repeat over and over again. Perhaps the form would change, but the essence would never change. Li Longji and his group were all disguised as Xue Chongjian's bodyguards. It looked like they were going out to hunt. When they were near Tonghua Gate, they stopped by the roadside. After a while, several generals in military uniform arrived with 3 to 5 bodyguards. Commander Guai Ma Sizong, Shangi Feng Wang Chongyi, Chowi Weiwei Lu Youqiu. These people each had bodyguards and hunting clothes, and all looked like they were going out to hunt. These people were all like-minded friends that Xue Chongjian had made in the name of Li Longji. It was almost dusk, and Tonghua Gate was located to the east of the palace. Although there were a few shops around, it was not a place where the common people lived. Merchants and travelers did not come and go through this gate, so the streets were very deserted. They all knew what they were going to do today. They were all rather nervous, but they also found it hard to restrain their longing and excitement. Seeing that everyone was present, Li Longji pulled his wide-brimmed hat back to his brow and whispered, "Let's go!" Chowi Wei whispered, "Wait, Royal Prince, have you reported such an important matter to the Prince of Xiang?" Li Longji glanced in the direction of the Prince of Xiang's estate and whispered, "We are doing this to serve the country. If we fail, we can just die for the country. There's no need to implicate my father. Moreover, my father is kind and has a gentle personality. If we report it today, it will be fine if father approves, but if he disapproves, it won't be good." Everyone nodded and left the Tonghua sect with Li Longji. After leaving Tonghua Gate, they rode along the official road for around 5. Li, seeing that there was no one else on the road, they suddenly turned their horses and charged north into the wilderness. They took a circuitous route for around 10 li, their horses drenched in sweat. When they arrived at an elm grove near the Imperial Army's camp, they saw 3 people and 3 horses waiting at the foot of the grove. The person at the front was Yang Fan, and behind him were Li Ida and Wang Maozhong. Chapter 1192. Li Longji stopped his horse from a distance and dismounted. He quickly walked towards Yang Fan, cupped his fists and greeted, "Great General!" Yang Fan smiled and cupped his hands. "Your Highness, was the journey smooth?" Seeing Yang Fan's extremely calm expression, Li Longji miraculously calmed down. He nodded at Yang Fan, and his smile became much more relaxed. Yang Fan said cheerfully, "All right, let's go to the Forbidden Court now." The political power in the imperial court had been purged by the Zetian dynasty and Li Xianchao, and was now cleaner than ever. The Wei faction was outshining the rest, and Li Longji had no support at all. Under such circumstances, Yang Fan and Li Longji had no choice but to be cautious. Today was the day of the coup, and very few people knew about it beforehand. There were dozens of them, and they were too obvious a target to enter the barracks. If they attracted the attention of others, the coup would probably be aborted. However, as the leader of the coup, Li Longji couldn't leave the barracks. Given the current communication conditions, he couldn't remotely control them. Therefore, they chose the Imperial Garden's supervisor as the former enemy command center of the coup. The Imperial Garden's supervisor was stationed at the north of the palace, and there was only one non-military organization among them, the Imperial Garden's supervisor. There were hundreds of gardeners in the Imperial Garden's supervisor who were responsible for the maintenance of the flowers and plants in the royal gardens and palace. The Imperial Garden Supervisor was located close to the north wall of the palace, and on its left and right were the barracks of the Imperial Garden Supervisor and the Imperial Garden Supervisor. The name of the Imperial Garden Supervisor was Zhong Xiaojing, who had long been bribed by Xue Chongjian. However, his official position was too low, and he couldn't play any other role in this coup. His biggest role was to provide a safe and convenient command center for Li Longji. Therefore, even he didn't know about today's coup. The Imperial Gardens Supervisor's gardener often saw Xue Chongjian drinking with Supervisor Zhong. Today, he came again with dozens of people in hunting gear. He thought that Xue Chongjian had returned from a hunting trip and couldn't return to the city. Therefore, he didn't suspect anything and enthusiastically let them in. Xue Chongjian led everyone to Zhong Xiaojing's residence with ease. After knocking a few times on the door knocker, a woman's voice could be heard asking, "Who is it?" Xue Chong gave a simple reply. The woman said, "So, it's young Master Xue. Please wait a moment." Xue Chongjian turned to Li Longji and said, "This woman is Supervisor Zhong." Everyone waited in front of the door for a while, but no one opened the door. Li Longji couldn't help but be vigilant. Xue Chongjian shouted a few more times. This Director Zhong was not a high-ranking official, and there were only 2 entrances to the house. He should be able to hear them clearly from inside the house, but there was no reply. Li Longji stealthily grasped the hilt of his sword and threw a glance at Wang Maozhong and Li Ida, instructing in a low voice, "You guys spread out and see if there's an ambush." Seeing that Xue Chongjian was unable to knock on the door, Wang Maozhong was so nervous that his face turned pale. As soon as he heard Li Longji's order, he immediately gestured to Li Ida and led a few people to scatter in all directions. Pretending to be calm, he secretly observed the situation. Li said, "Li, Xue Longji, fan and. Li. Li Longji glanced at the gardeners who were strolling around the Forbidden Garden and said in a low voice, "That won't do. There are still a few hours before we make our move. There are several hundred people in this Forbidden Garden. Once someone notices that something is wrong, we won't be able to control so many people." Xue Chongjian cursed. That old Zhong. What is he up to? In the main hall of the Zhong residence, Zhong Xiaojing is standing upright with his forehead drenched in cold sweat. At this juncture, he is afraid. His heart is indeed on Li Tang's side. In addition to Xue Chongjian's friendship with him, he has the mentality of a gentleman dying for a bosom friend. In addition, he also has the desire to bestow his wife and son to him. Hence, he agreed to serve the Prince of Linzi. However, he did not know that today is the day of the crisis. He also did not know that his residence will be under the command of the King of Linzi, and was not mentally prepared. Just now, when Madame came to report the news, Zhong Xiaojing hurriedly went to the front hall and peeked through the crack of the door. Looking at the attire and expressions of the people outside, he knew that the day has finally come. Once the door is opened, he will be on the same boat as the Prince of Xiang. Thinking about the consequences of failure, especially with the example of Crown Prince Li Zhongjuan's failed rebellion, Zhong Xiaojing suddenly felt an inexplicable panic. He is only a lowly official in charge of the gardens and is responsible for taking care of the flowers and grasses. How can he remain calm when faced with such a major event? For a moment, Zhong Xiaojing's heart was in turmoil, and he could not make up his mind. Zhong Xiaojing's wife, Madame Su, has always been deeply in love with her husband. She did not hide the fact that her husband is seeking refuge with the King of Linzi. Looking at her husband's expression, she understood that the King of Linzi is going to start a rebellion tonight. Seeing her husband's unwillingness to make up his mind, Madame Su went to him and gently called out, "Husband!" Zhong Xiaojing regained his senses and looked at his wife in a daze. Madame Su solemnly explained, "Husband has an agreement with the King of Linzi. Even if you turn them away today, if they fail, do you think that husband can escape death? Even if you sacrifice yourself for the country, the deities will secretly protect you." At this point, husband must not hesitate any longer. Listening to his wife's advice, Zhong Xiaojing carefully thought about it and agreed with her reasoning. Actually, from the day he agreed to serve the king of Linzi, he is already on the same boat as the Prince of Xiang and can no longer leave. Zhong Xiaojing gritted his teeth and affirmed, "Wife is right. Your husband will go and welcome the prince." Outside the courtyard, Li Longji and the rest have been waiting for Zhong Xiaojing for a long time. Knowing that something unexpected has happened, they are stuck in a dilemma. Not to mention Xue Chongjian, Lu Youqiu, and the rest. Even Li Longji's face is somewhat pale. Even the usually calm and composed Yang Fan could not help but frown, thinking to himself, could it be that this is an unfavorable start, and before the rebellion can be launched, the halberds will sink into the sand? At this moment, the door bolt clanged loudly, and the courtyard doors opened. Standing at the entrance, Zhong Xiaojing squeezed out a smile and loudly exclaimed, "Aha! I am taking a bath. Sorry for making young Master Xue wait. Please, please, please come in." This group of people has been standing at the entrance for a long time, and many of the gardeners have started to notice them. Some of them are even whispering to each other, now that Director Zhong personally came out to welcome them. These people's suspicions were dispelled, and they dispersed. Li Longji secretly heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly instructed a guard beside him, "Go and call Ida and Mao Zhong back." He then followed Xue Chongjian into the courtyard. Zhong Xiaojing's house has only 2 entrances, and the courtyard is not small. In the spacious courtyard, there are chickens and ducks and a few plots of vegetables, giving the atmosphere of the countryside. After the courtyard doors are closed, Xue Chongjian reported to Zhong Xiaojing, "Director Zhong, our uprising will take place tonight. This is the Prince of Linzi. Hurry up and pay your respects." Zhong Xiaojing saw a handsome young man, dressed like a guard, nodding and smiling at him. He hurriedly kneeled on the ground and greeted, "Zhong Xiaojing pays his respects to your Royal Highness." Looking at his expression, Li Longji can tell that the bathing is just an excuse. However, this is a matter of life and death, and it is normal for him to be conflicted. Since he is willing to open the door, it means that he is ultimately on his side. Therefore, Li Longji didn't expose him. He just went forward to help him up and comforted him. Director Zhong is loyal to the country and has a high sense of righteousness. Our Li family will never forget your loyalty. If we succeed, we will definitely reward you generously. Zhong Xiaojing also knows that the reason he gave earlier is not very credible. Moreover, Li Longji's words are sincere and without any intention of deceiving him. Zhong Xiaojing felt ashamed and did not dare to continue the conversation. He passionately invited everyone into the courtyard. Just as Li Longji was about to follow Zhong Xiaojing into the courtyard, Li Yi suddenly barged in with a few guards. Seeing Li Longji, he reported, "Royal Prince Wang Maozhong is missing." Li Longji was shocked and hurriedly questioned, "How can he be missing? What has happened to him?" Li Yi's expression is a little strange. He stammered, someone saw him just now. He led a horse and quietly left the Forbidden Park supervisor's gates. What? Xue Chongjian, Zhong Xiaojing, and the others paled. Xue Chongjian anxiously tugged on Li Longji's sleeve and said in fear, "This is bad. Sanlang, let's go." Li Longji was dragged 2 steps away by him. Suddenly, he grabbed the other's wrist and stood firmly in place. Xue Chongjian anxiously asked, "Sanlang, what are you doing?" Li Longji's brows furrowed, and he lightly shook his head. "We can't leave." Xue Chongjian stamped his feet. "Why can't we leave? If we don't leave now, when Wang Maozhong leads House Wei's troops here, we won't be able to live." Zhong Xiaojing was so frightened that his teeth chattered. He said in a trembling voice, "Yes, yes. Since they haven't arrived yet, Royal Prince, you should leave quickly." "Oh, this one also has to leave with Royal Prince. Wife, quickly pack up your belongings." Li Longji said solemnly, House Wei won't come to capture us. Lu Yoqiu asked in bewilderment. How can Royal Prince be so sure? Li Longji said, Wang Maozhong is a servant of my residence and has served me since he was young. I know him best. He doesn't have any ulterior motives, but he's as timid as a mouse. If I'm not mistaken, he's running for his life because Director Zhong opened the door a little late and thought that something had happened. Li Longji laughed bitterly. If he stays, we'll have one more helper. If he escapes, we'll just lose a pair of fists. Today is the day everyone and I will get rid of this great rebel, bring peace to the country, and reap riches and honor. Now, all the preparations have been made. Even if Wei Dang didn't find any clues tonight, they'll definitely find something strange tomorrow. If we give up now, we'll still be unable to escape death tomorrow. Everyone we can only fight. There's no turning back. Li Longji's words were sonorous, forceful, and extremely infectious. When everyone heard his voice, their fear subsided slightly, and the thought of escaping immediately lessened considerably. Yang Fan was also secretly shocked just now, but now that he saw that Li Longji's words were reasonable, he felt a little more at ease. He then saw that Li Longji was also secretly frightened, but he was still able to force himself to remain calm and prevent everyone from escaping because of this accident. He couldn't help but admire him. Yang Fan agreed. Royal Prince's words are reasonable. If Wang Maozhong really is a traitor, the moment we entered the Imperial Garden, we would have already set up an ambush everywhere. Would we still wait for him to report? Wang Maozhong became a deserter because of fear. We can't let all our previous efforts go to waste. When everyone heard Yang Fan agree with Li Longji's words, they unconsciously believed him a little more since these two had the highest status in the group. At this moment, Xue Chongjian suddenly cried out in alarm. Oh no, Wang Maozhong has escaped. Who's going to be in charge of contacting the 10,000 winged cavalry? When Li Longji wasn't in the capital, Wang Maozhong and Li Ida had been recruiting the generals for him. Li Ida was loyal and brave, but he was slow with words. Wang Maozhong, on the other hand, was eloquent and eloquent. Thus, he had always been in charge. Tonight, Li Longji was going to seize the military power of the 10,000 cavalry and the winged cavalry, and Wang Maozhong was in charge of contacting the generals in the imperial army and commanding them to seize power. Who knew that he would escape at the last moment? What should they do? Speaking of military coups, there had been 3 since the establishment of the Tang dynasty. Li Shimin's was the simplest and the most straightforward one. He ambushed the unsuspecting crown prince Li Jianqing and Prince Qi Li Yuanji at Xuanwu Gate. It was a clean and efficient coup. The second time was when Zhang Jianji and the others planned the divine dragon coup, faced with a powerful empress who controlled the elite imperial army. They formulated the most sophisticated coup plan. The third time was when Crown Prince Li Zhongjuan rebelled against Emperor Li Xian. Although the coup this time was rather disorganized and the process was fraught with difficulties, he was only one step away from succeeding. If Li Xian hadn't ascended Xuanwu Gate at the last moment, and this time because the entire imperial court was under the control of the Wei faction. Even the actions planned by dragons and phoenixes among men like Yang Fan and Li Longji were met with frequent accidents in the face of the huge disparity in strength. First, it was Zhong Xiaojing who got scared at the last moment, followed by Wang Maozhong who escaped at the last moment. Both of them had important missions. A dark cloud quietly floated over everyone's hearts. This is not a good sign. Chapter 1193. I'll go. At the crucial moment, Yang Fan stepped forward bravely, even though the word "I'll" was a little forced and helpless. Although he didn't interact much with Gufu Shen, Qin Xuanli, and the others, he had still met them a few times. Furthermore, he was the creator of the 10,000 cavalry and the general-in-chief who supports the nation. His prestige and status in the army, especially in the imperial army, were unparalleled. He was actually more suitable than Wang Maozhong to step forward. However, Yang Fan had already decided to live in seclusion. He and Li Longji had already discussed the conditions, so he didn't want to play a role in this coup. Otherwise, the imperial court would have no choice but to reward him if he succeeded. Therefore, Yang Fan wanted to hide behind the scenes. However, the situation was urgent. If he didn't step forward to clean up the mess, he could forget about living in seclusion. From then on, he could only run for his life. He could only bite the bullet and step forward. As for whether this would affect his plan to live in seclusion, he could only take it one step at a time. When Li Longji saw Yang Fan stepping forward bravely, he said happily, "Now, only the great general can take charge of the situation. Since that's the case, I'll leave everything in the army to the great general." Yang Fan said, "Royal Prince, just sit here and wait for my good news." With that, he cupped his fists towards everyone and left with large strides. Li Longji's coup had just started, but the battle between the obvious and hidden sects and Lu Binji, who was preparing to take advantage of the situation, was in full swing and extremely smooth. 3 days ago, Yang Fan had already issued an order for the obvious and hidden sects to launch an all-out attack on the hidden sects. After hearing the news, Lu Binji also immediately issued an order, ordering his men to take advantage of the moment when the obvious and hidden sects were fighting to the death to deal a fatal blow. He had to grasp this opportunity. He was well aware of how powerful the obvious and hidden sects were, and how deep their foundations were. No matter how much damage he inflicted on them, it was impossible to completely destroy them. At most, he could allow them to continue existing in a different form, and in time they would rise again. Lu Binji's feasible solutions were either to rise as a third force while the obvious and hidden sects were greatly weakened, or to take over the succession hall while the obvious and hidden sects were heavily injured and become the new ruler of the underground kingdom. But he would never have thought that the obvious and hidden sects would spend so much time and sacrifice so much to set up a trap. The secret forces that he had spent so much money and resources to build up in various places would all be revealed. Only the heads of the obvious and hidden sects knew that they were putting on a show. Even the elders were deceived, not to mention the other people, including the local gentry forces under their control, who didn't know that they belonged to such an organization. Therefore, the confrontation between the obvious and hidden sects these days was enough to make it seem real, because those who carried out the plan were acting for real. How could Lu Binji see any clues from it? The chaotic war in Chang and city would begin tonight. The predator side was the obvious sect, while the prey side was the hidden sect. The one who was secretly preparing to devour both the predator and the prey was Lu Binji. But Lu Binji would soon discover that the predator and the prey had actually worked together to set up a trap. The goal was to lure out his hidden forces, and he was the true prey. However, when he realized this, it was too late. Also, the hidden forces that Lu Binji had cultivated in various places would attack at the same time. Once the battle started, even if they knew they had been tricked, they wouldn't have time to warn him. In the enormous Chang and city that was as orderly as a chessboard, countless chess pieces started to act according to the tasks that their superiors had set for them. A game of chess began, but it was covered up by the impending battle for the country. The teams of the obvious sect that were in charge of the operation finally opened a brocade bag, according to the orders of their superiors. This was Yang Fan's order. Up until now, Yang Fan had always given orders to the obvious sect through Ren Wei, but he had agreed to use another group of assassins as a cover. He had long ago established a channel that bypassed Ren Wei and the people around him to directly command the forces of the obvious sect. This time, this special path was put to use for the first time. According to the requirements, each brocade bag was opened and passed around in front of all the members participating in the operation. After reading it, the expressions of all the people participating in the operation were very interesting. Yang Fan wasn't sure if Ren Wei was the only one among his subordinates that had been bribed, so he used this method of only giving orders when the operation started. This method was very effective. it was still used thousands of years later. This way, even if there were people in the obvious sect that had been bribed by Lu Binji, they would not be able to ruin the plan. In reality, there weren't many people under Yang Fan that had been bribed. More accurately, there was only Renwei. The people that had caused the conflict between the two sects were just being used by others. They didn't even know who was using them or what their goal was. Lu Binji's return this time could be said to be full of schemes. He was very careful in his actions. If he bribed too many people, if someone betrayed him or refused to be bribed, he could only eliminate them, and it would be hard to keep the secret. Also, his goal was to cause conflict between the obvious and hidden sects and reap the benefits without doing anything. He didn't want to overthrow the obvious sect and usurp power. The difference in fighting meant that he didn't need to take a great risk to bribe too many people. The people of the obvious sect looked at the sect master's plan. While they felt strange, they still strictly followed the sect master's orders and started to act. They attacked the members of the hidden sect that they had confirmed beforehand, and Shan Mu strictly carried out his promise to Yang Fan. Fully cooperate. Caught off guard, the hidden sect suffered heavy losses. Lu Binji's people followed the time and place that Renwei provided and patiently hid the side, playing the role of the Oriole. When the Mantis and Cicada's side suffered a crushing defeat and the other side won a Pyrrhic victory, they excitedly jumped out. Then, they discovered to their shock that the people who had suffered a crushing defeat and the Pyrrhic victory suddenly became lively. The people who were limping suddenly moved as though they were flying. The people who were on the verge of collapse suddenly became lively, and the people who had fallen to the ground suddenly came back to life. They had all jumped into the trap of death. In front of the Flying Mount camp, a junior colonel was anxiously waiting and occasionally looked into the distance. He was Gu Fuxin's trusted aide and had been sent to receive Wang Maozhong. Seeing that the sky was getting darker and darker, and that it was hard to see anything more than 100 steps away, but Wang Maozhong was still nowhere to be seen, this junior colonel was burning with anxiety. Just at this time, Yang Fan walked over from the other side. This junior colonel didn't think that someone would come from the direction of the Imperial Gardens and jumped in fright when he heard the footsteps. He hurriedly turned around and saw that it was the person who had seen his general with Wang Maozhong. He hurriedly went forward and asked, "Where is Sir Wang?" Yang Fan said, "Wang Maozhong did not come for some reason, so I went to see General Ge." The order that the junior colonel had received was to receive Wang Maozhong into the camp. Gu Fuxin had repeatedly reminded him not to make any mistakes. Now that Wang Maozhong was nowhere to be seen, and the other side had changed people, he couldn't help but hesitate. Yang Fan said, "What are you hesitating for? Just bring me there. Once General Ge sees me, he will understand everything. I am only one person. Are you afraid that something will go wrong?" The junior colonel had seen Yang Fan come with Wang Maozhong. After a moment's thought, he had no choice but to agree and bring Yang Fan into the camp. Gu Fuxin was also waiting anxiously, because he had something on his mind. He hadn't eaten much of his dinner. The junior colonel shouted from outside, "General!" Gu Fuxin, who had been sitting there all this time, jumped up and dashed to the door. Lifting the tent flap, he grumbled, "Why did you only?" As soon as he saw Yang Fan, Gu Fuxin was stunned and couldn't continue. How could Yang Fan tell the truth and disturb the morale of the army? He smiled slightly and said, "This is an important matter. The Junwang changed his mind at the last minute and sent me here to cooperate with General Ge." Gu Fuxin was overjoyed. Although he had long since known that his subordinates were full of complaints about the generals sent by Houseway, he was at least 70% certain that they would follow him when the time came. Still, he was somewhat apprehensive. Now that the general-in-chief who supports the nation, the well-respected Yang Fan of the Imperial Army, had arrived in person, his rallying power naturally couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as before. His chances of success would also be greater. Gu Fushen hurriedly welcomed Yang Fan into the commander's tent and repeatedly said, "I dare not, I dare not. Since the great general is here, the great general will naturally take charge. This general will follow the great general's lead." Yang Fan smiled and said, "I am not being polite. My rank is already high enough. If I were to be rewarded, it would be too meritorious. Ha ha! General Ge, there is no need to be polite. The greatest merit is yours. No one can take it away." Yang Fan talked cheerfully and wittily. Gu Fushen's nervous mood also relaxed. When he heard that Yang Fan didn't want to compete with him for merit, he was even more grateful. Yang Fan entered the tent and sat down. He asked, "How are the preparations over here?" Speaking of this operation, Yang Fan was also helpless. In the previous 2 coups, he was a participant in one and a resistor in the other. Therefore, he was very familiar with the inside story. In both coups, a large number of high-ranking generals participated and civil officials cooperated in the planning. Now, the situation was very different. The Wei clique had already taken control of all the important positions. Not a single civil official in the imperial court had participated. Yang Fan's greatest reliance was the 10,000 cavalry. However, because the middle and lower-ranking officers of the 10,000 cavalry were his former subordinates, after Empress Wei established the winged cavalry, some of the important missions were transferred to the winged cavalry. He also exchanged some of the 10,000 cavalry with the winged cavalry officers. If Yang Fan wanted to take action now, he couldn't do it without the cooperation of these winged cavalry officers. However, it was precisely because the entire Yulin Royal Guards was a mix of good and bad people that many of the middle and lower-ranking officers hadn't been clearly roped in beforehand. Therefore, he couldn't be sure that they would definitely participate in the coup. Now, Yang Fan could only rely on the control these middle and high-ranking officers had over the army and the resentment that the soldiers of the 3 armies had towards the incompetent generals sent by the Wei family for bullying and humiliating them. Only at the moment of the uprising could he announce the coup. There were undoubtedly many variables, and the risks were extremely high. After Zhong Xiaojing's wavering and Wang Maozhong's absconding, even Yang Fan didn't dare to be so optimistic about the future. Gu Fushen said in a low voice, "Apart from me, Generals Chen Xuanli and Xiong Mingwei's trusted aides, the soldiers of the 3 armies are still unaware of this matter. This general intends to go kill a few of the Wei family's Yulin Royal Guards tonight before calling the 3 armies to revolt." Yang Fan nodded and said, "What a good plan to catch bandits. First capture the ringleader. When the time comes, this general will go with you." Chapter 1194. Yang Fan and Gu Fushen were sitting under the tent. Just one more watch, and they would raise their sharp knives and charge into the tent to take the general's head. If they succeed, they would be bestowed the title of Marquis and Prime Minister. If they fail, their families would be destroyed. At this time, it was clear that they were not in the mood to talk about romance. However, if they did not talk about this, the 2 men sitting opposite each other became a very boring thing, especially at this time of extreme psychological torture. Yang Fan saw that Gu Fushen was fidgeting restlessly, his huge buttocks twisting and turning, causing the stool under his buttocks to creak. He could not help but ask with a smile, "Somewhat nervous?" Gu Fushen's rough face showed a trace of embarrassment. He spat on the ground to hide his embarrassment and said with an embarrassed smile, "I have been in the army for more than 20 years. From a soldier to today, I have fought hundreds of battles on the battlefield. I have taken at least 100 lives. I did not expect that I would be so nervous today. I really have no prospects." Yang Fan said with a smile, "General Gu is certainly not afraid of death. However, if this matter fails, not only will you lose your own life, you will also implicate your family. This is very different from dying on the battlefield. It is normal for you to be a little uneasy." Gu Fushen saw that Yang Fan was calm and composed. He could not help but praise. Great General is indeed great general. Although in terms of age, great general is younger than me, but great general's ability to be calm and composed is something that I cannot compare to. Yang Fan smiled faintly and thought, if I had not made arrangements for my family, I am afraid I would be sitting on pins and needles like you. He sighed and subconsciously looked in the direction of the palace. There was a part of his concern there. After today's matter, he had fulfilled his wish for the country. After making arrangements for the future of his comrades, he could go far away from Jiang Hu hand in hand with her. After a moment of silence, the two of them closed their eyes and rested. On the second watch, the sound of the clapper had just sounded. Gu Fuxin's body shook, and he suddenly opened his eyes. He saw Yang Fan sitting cross-legged on the ground with his hands gently placed beside his legs. His breathing was deep, and he was motionless. Gu Fuxin felt ashamed and closed his eyes again. At a quarter to the second watch, Yang Fan suddenly opened his eyes, and Gu Fuxin opened his eyes almost at the same time. Their eyes met, and both of them stood up. Gu Fuxin said solemnly, "The time has come. Great General, let's move." Yang Fan said, "How do you plan to begin?" Gu Fuxin replied, "Naturally, we will lead our personal guards and charge into the main camp with Chen Xuanli, Xiong Mingshan, and Li Xianfu." Yang Fan said, "This plan isn't feasible. Once we make a move, we'll alarm the entire army. The flying cavalry battalion will have to fight to the death first. Once the news is leaked, the palace will know about it and make preparations in advance. Our chances of success will be slim." Gu Fuxin was stunned. "Then what does the great general mean?" Yang Fan said, "I've thought about it just now. Given your status and the flying cavalry battalion's usual situation, as long as we can enter the main camp, taking the heads of Wei Bo and the other two will be as easy as taking something out of our pockets. Why do we need to go to war?" Yang Fan hung his saber at his waist and said in a carefree manner, "Let's go." Gu Fuxin hurriedly made some adjustments and instructed someone to inform Chen Xuanli and the rest of the changes in the plan. Then he gave Yang Fan a set of imperial bodyguards' clothes and boldly rushed to the main camp. "Halt! Who's there?" When the soldiers guarding the main gate saw people coming from afar, they immediately raised their spears and shouted. When they saw Gu Fuxin walking over under the moonlight with an imperial bodyguard, they hurriedly greeted, "Commander Go, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping?" Gu Fuxin coughed and said, "I have something to report to General Wei Bo." A platoon commander was surprised and said, "At this time? I'm afraid General Wei is already asleep. Does Commander Go have something urgent to report?" Gu Fuxin's face darkened and he reprimanded, "Do I need to report anything to you?" The platoon commander didn't dare to contradict him and awkwardly retreated to the side. Gu Fuxin snorted coldly and walked past with his head held high. Yang Fan followed suit. The platoon commander gloomily said to himself, "I'm just afraid you'll go at the wrong time and be taught a lesson by General Wei. Seriously, why do you have such a bad temper?" The residences in the main camp were also arranged in rows. However, Wei Bo and the other important generals' residences were located in the officers' quarters. The high-ranking generals all had their own residences with front and back courtyards. This was the Imperial Army's main camp, so there was naturally no need for security inside. As a result, the two of them didn't see a single soldier along the way. When Gu Fuxin arrived at Wei Bo's residence, he originally wanted to climb over the wall and enter. Unexpectedly, when he pushed the courtyard door, it unexpectedly opened. Yang Fan looked left and right and said to Gu Fuxin in a low voice, "Go in." The two of them entered the courtyard in a flash, leaving the courtyard door ajar. When they reached the front door and pushed it, the door was unexpectedly not bolted. With a soft creak, the door was gently pushed open and a loud snore was immediately heard. Yang Fan said to Gu Fuxin in a low voice, "I'll keep watch." Gu Fuxin nodded and slowly unsheathed his saber, quietly sneaking into the room. The layout of the buildings in the army camp was all the same. As if entering his own room, Gu Fuxin flashed into Wei Bo's bedroom with familiarity. He saw the flickering candlelight. Not a single lamp was extinguished. The light shone on the bed. Wei Bo was only wearing a pair of snub-nosed trousers, his upper body bare as he slept soundly, snoring loudly. Seeing this, Gu Fuxin couldn't help but feel his blood boil. The credit of killing Wei Bo is mine. He was a general, and his actions were straightforward. At this time, he wouldn't think too much about it and immediately raised the sharp blade. It was as if people really did have a sixth sense. Wei Bo was sleeping soundly when suddenly he seemed to sense some kind of unknown danger. His snoring stopped and he opened his eyes, but it was already too late. Wei Bo only saw a tall figure standing in front of the bed, blocking the light from the table. This person's arms were raised high in the air and a cold light was chopping down from above. Wei Bo's startled cry had just rushed up his throat, but before it could explode out of his mouth, he was chopped into two halves by the sharp blade. Hearing the sudden stop of snoring, Yang Fan knew that Gu Fuxin had succeeded. A moment later, Gu Fuxin came out of the room. Patting his waist, he said excitedly, "It's done. It's a piece of cake." He saw a handkerchief tied around his waist, wrapped around a round object. Presumably it was Wei Bo's head. Yang Fan whispered, "Where is Wei Bo's residence?" Gu Fuxin replied in a low voice, "The residences of the generals are all next to each other. The one next to them is Wei Bo's residence." Yang Fan made a hand signal to him, and the two of them quietly left Wei Bo's small courtyard. Wei Bo's courtyard door was bolted. This kind of low courtyard wall naturally couldn't stop someone like Yang Fan, who could come and go as high as he wanted. However, after pushing the courtyard door, he found that he didn't need to climb over the wall. The courtyard door was not closed well. When he pushed it, there was a gap the width of a finger, and he could remove the bolts with a knife. It was the same arrangement. Yang Fan would stand guard while Gu Fuxin would kill. This time the room was not lit. Gu Fuxin sneaked into the inner room and heard light, snoring coming from the bed. Trying to figure out the general position, he chopped down with his knife. Pooh! Following the sound of a sharp weapon entering the body, there was a cry of pain. Someone cursed vaguely. "What's going on?" "It hurts." Gu Fuxin was greatly alarmed. He thought that he had missed and was afraid that Wei Bo would cry out. He immediately pounced forward, the knife in his hand, chopping down viciously. Ugh! With a muffled grunt, the cursing turned into a soft groan. Gu Fuxin pulled out his knife and stabbed again. After stabbing 6 or 7 times in succession, he finally stopped with a head full of cold sweat. He panted heavily in the dark for a long time before he finally found a table and used a match to light a lamp. He moved the bed to take a look and couldn't help but spit. Bad luck? No wonder he had missed. There was more than one person on the bed. Lying on the outer side was a young man with delicate features. He was completely naked, had fair skin, a slender waist, and narrow buttocks. His head had already been separated from his body. Because the knife had been too fast, this person's expression was very serene, and he was still in a sleeping posture. However, when contrasted with the pool of blood on the bed, it looked somewhat frightening and strange. On the inner side of the bed was Wei Zhuo. Wei Zhuo was also completely naked. Gu Fuxin's knife had pierced through the young man's body and pierced through his chest. The previous few stabs had also pierced through the young man's body and pierced into his body. His chest and abdomen were a bloody mess. Wei Zhuo's eyes were wide open in anger, and his face was filled with horror. He was already dead. There was a knife wound on his cheek. The wound was not deep, but it was dripping with blood. It was likely that Gu Fuxin's knife had also cut his cheek when he chopped off Qing's head. In the army, there were soldiers with delicate features and delicate features. Often, they would be played by veterans or their superiors. Gu Fuxin had been in the army for a long time and was no stranger to this kind of thing. He just didn't expect Wei Zhuo to have this kind of hobby. Even though he had killed Wei Zhuo, Gu Fushin was already drenched in cold sweat. He hurriedly pulled out his sharp knife and chopped off Wei Zhuo's head. He wiped the blood on the bed and wrapped it in the sweat towel around his waist before leaving in a hurry. Seeing him come out, Yang Fan couldn't help but frown. "What took you so long?" Gu Fushin smiled bitterly. There was an accident. "Grand General, don't worry, it has already been resolved." Hearing this, Yang Fan didn't ask any more questions. Following Wei Zhuo's lead, the two of them once again rushed towards Gao Chong's residence. Gao Chong was Empress Wei's nephew. This person had always been addicted to alcohol. Today he was completely drunk. Not to mention that Gu Fushin was extremely careful when he sneaked in. Even if he boldly barged in, lit the lamp, and helped Gao Chong position himself in the most suitable position to receive a knife, Gao Chong still wouldn't wake up. Gu Fushin very smoothly chopped off Gao Chong's head. Wrapping the three heads together in a sweat towel, he slung it over his shoulder and slipped into the courtyard like a melon thief. Seeing that he had succeeded again, Yang Fan was also delighted. "Come, let's go to the commander's tent and beat the drums to gather the generals." After obtaining the heads of Wei Bo and the other two, Gu Fushin no longer had a higher position than him in the Flying Mount Battalion. Instantly his courage grew, and he and Yang Fan headed straight for the commander's tent. The commander's tent naturally had soldiers on duty. At this moment, Gu Fushin had revealed his true intentions and naturally did not hold back. He was a Flying Mount Lang general, and if he insisted on barging into the commander's tent, those soldiers didn't dare to use force and could only helplessly let him pass. But these soldiers also didn't dare to take responsibility and could only send someone to inform Wei Bo. How could they know that Wei Bo's head was currently in Gu Fushin's hands? Gu Fushin barged into the commander's tent. Under the illumination of the torches, he took a look at the painting of a fierce tiger descending the mountain behind the commander's desk. He threw the cloth, wrapping the three heads, under the commander's desk with a thud. He shouted to the soldiers on duty who had followed him into the commander's tent, "Go! Beat the drums to gather the generals!" The soldiers in the Middle Army were directly under Wei Bo. Wei Bo had always been strict in managing the army and frequently used torture. Who would dare to carelessly listen to other people's orders? A platoon commander braced himself and said to Gu Fushin, "General Gu, this lowly officer doesn't dare to obey." Gu Fushin snorted and said, "I know you don't dare, so I won't make things difficult for you. I'll do it myself." Gu Fushin rushed to the tent and took down a pair of drumsticks from the drum stand. With a dong sound, he struck the drum, which was as tall as a man. Bam, bam, bam. Gu Fushin finished beating the drums. He paused for a moment, then suddenly changed the rhythm and started beating the charging drum. Those commanders who heard the sound and rushed over looked at each other in dismay. They didn't understand what kind of madness General Go was going through. The drums had to be beaten 3 times in a row. After 3 rounds, those who did not arrive within the time limit would be beheaded. But there had never been anyone who beat the drums 1 time and then beat the charging drum right after. The rhythm of the two was different. Those who had been in the army for a long time could tell the difference. Someone thought to himself, "I heard General Go hasn't been very successful lately. General Wei Bo is going to transfer him out of the Imperial Army very soon. Could it be that he is too depressed and has lost his mind?" A brigade commander belonging to the Middle Army heard the drums and hurriedly got up and rushed to the commander's tent. He saw a group of guards on night patrol standing there in a daze. A burly man was beating the war drum with all his might. By now, the drum had turned into the charging drum. The brigade commander looked at the man beating the drum and recognized it was Gu Fushin. Not only was he his old superior, they were on very good terms, like brothers. Usually, they didn't pay much attention to seniority. He couldn't help laughing in surprise and said, "Old Gu, what kind of madness are you going through?" Gu Fushin ignored him and continued to beat the drum with all his might. The sound of the drum rumbled throughout the camp. Qian Xuanli, Xiong Mingwei, Li Xianfu and the others had already received his message. As soon as they heard the chaotic sound of the drum, they knew that Gafushin had succeeded. Excited, they immediately led their personal guards and rushed over. Chapter 1195. Although the winged cavalry generals were baffled by the beating of the drum, they became even more curious. As a result, they didn't arrive any later than the usual 3 drum beats. When Gafushin switched from the charge drum order to the drum order to gather generals and beat the drum for the 3rd time, dozens of lieutenants, commandants, and brigade marshals had already gathered around him. All of them were wearing helmets and armor and had swords strapped to their ribs. They looked murderous. The generals didn't enter the commander's tent because the first to arrive were the well-prepared Chen Xuanli, Li Xianfu, Xiong Mingwei, and the rest. These people gathered around Gafushin as soon as they arrived. People have herd mentality, so they naturally stopped. Moreover, they heard that the drum wasn't the drum order and knew that it wasn't Lieutenant Commander Wei Bo who summoned them. When they stopped and saw that the person beating the drum was Lieutenant Commander Ge, they felt even more strange and wanted to know why. After beating the drum 3 times, Gafushin threw away the drumsticks and was slightly out of breath. These generals were all very familiar with Gafushin. Many of them had been drinking and swearing together. When Gafushin threw away his drumstick, one of them scolded, "Old Go, what are you doing in the middle of the night?" Gafushin said in a clear voice, "Generals, do you want to know why I beat the drum in the middle of the night? Please come into the tent and talk." As he spoke loudly, his eyes drifted to Xiong Mingwei, Qin Xuanli, Li Xianfu, and the rest. These people nodded their heads inconspicuously, hinting that he had already arranged the bodyguards around the commander's tent. Gafushin felt relieved and took the lead to walk into the main tent. At this time, the squad leader, who was originally guarding the commander's tent and had gone to report to Wei Bo, ran back in a daze, as if he was being chased by a malicious spirit. He rushed to the squad leader's side and said a few words while trembling. At this moment, all the general's attention was on Gafushin and no one noticed him. After hearing what he said, the captain was shocked and hurriedly covered his mouth. He vigilantly looked forward and was relieved to see that no generals had heard him. However, when he turned his gaze again, he saw the captain of Li Xianfu's bodyguards holding the hilt of his saber and looking at him with a faint smile. He couldn't help but be emboldened. The captain smiled at him and suddenly said, "Old Jia, behave yourself. We are all brothers, so don't harm each other." The captain's expression was very ugly, but he really didn't say anything. The generals of the winged cavalry battalions were anxious to find out the whole story and rushed to the commander's tent together. The entrance of the tent, which was extremely spacious, was actually a little congested. However, the strange thing was that even though the entrance of the tent was congested and the generals were whispering to each other as they walked in, the moment they entered the tent, their voices would immediately stop and not a single sound could be heard. It was as if the person who stepped into the tent had entered another world. This strange phenomenon naturally aroused the vigilance of the people at the back. However, the people at the front were all gathered together, and those generals who suddenly held their breaths were still there. Naturally, they could not have been plotted against or met with an accident. Then, what exactly did they see that made them suddenly shut up? The more curious they were, the more they wanted to know. The people behind them squeezed forward even more. But as soon as they had reached the front, they stood silent, like those who had entered the tent before them. Gradually, all the generals entered the commander's tent. However, they didn't stand solemnly on the left and right as usual. Instead, they huddled together and stared straight at the table. They saw Commander-in-Chief Wei Bo, Wei Zhuo, and Gao Chong, the 2 deputy generals. The 3 winged cavalry commanders appeared uniformly on the table. One of them glared angrily, one was startled, and the last one had his eyes closed and was sleeping peacefully. However, there were only their heads, only 3 heads. They were not standing behind the table, but were placed on top of it. Behind the table, there was a huge painting of a ferocious tiger descending the mountain. It was a majestic and gorgeous tiger with a vigorous tail that was like a hook in the sky. The tiger's head was huge, and its eyes were wide open. It seemed to be glaring at the three heads on the table, and its fangs were sharp and awe-inspiring. Below the tiger stood a young man in a military uniform. His eyes were bright like stars, and there was a smile on his lips. With his hands clasped behind his back, he stood calmly behind the table. Although there were dozens of generals in the tent and 3 bloody heads on the table, he was calm and composed, as if he was admiring plum blossoms in the snow. Although he was only wearing a military uniform made of coarse cloth, his graceful bearing and disdainful demeanor outshone all the domineering generals in armor and helmets. It was as if he was naturally above everyone else since he was here. All the high-ranking generals in the winged cavalry camp recognized him. He was the general-in-chief who supports the nation in the Tang dynasty, Yang Fan. Today, I am the one who gathered all the generals. Yang Fan opened his mouth to speak. He was the general-in-chief who supports the nation and the commander-in-chief of the 3 armies of the Tang dynasty. Naturally, he was qualified to do so. Yang Fan continued, "All of you are generals of the Tang dynasty and receive the salary of the Tang dynasty. You should be loyal to the Tang dynasty. Today, the Wei family is monopolizing power and holding the young lord hostage. All of us are willing to serve Prince Lin Zi as the commander-in-chief. In the name of His Royal Highness Prince Xiang, we will mobilize the imperial guards and restore Li Tang's rule. This is the duty of our soldiers. Will all of you obey?" The winged cavalry was led by Wei Bo, Wei Zhuo, and Gao Chong. The 10,000 cavalry was led by Wei Xian, Wei Jie, and Wu Yanxiu. All of them were controlled by members of the Wei family. However, Yang Fan was not worried about the 10,000 cavalry. With Chu Kuanga, Huang Xuchang, Ma Qiao, and other valiant generals, as well as Su Liang and Lu Maofeng, the outcome of the battle could be determined. Yang Fan was worried about the winged cavalry. He did not know the capabilities of Gu Fuxin, Chen Xuanli, and the other generals. He also did not know how much influence they have among the winged cavalry. Therefore, he wanted to oversee them personally. However, he still wanted Gu Fuxin to be the main character of this show. Yang Fan did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. With a single sentence, everyone immediately understood that someone is plotting a coup and could not help but be aghast. Gu Fuxin, who was standing at the side of the marshal's table, saw the strange expression on everyone's faces. He drew his saber and shouted, "Brothers, do you know how the late emperor died? The late emperor was poisoned by Empress Wei." Once this statement was out, everyone in the tent was in an uproar. Even Yang Fan was surprised. However, he did not reveal his surprise at this point in time. Yang Fan merely glanced at Gu Fuxin from the corner of his eye and thought to himself, "This is a good reason. Could it be this crude man's idea? Could it be the Prince of Lin Zi's idea? Why didn't you tell me beforehand?" After Gu Fuxin finished his statement, he saw the shocked and angry looks on the faces of the generals and was secretly delighted. Hey, Wang Maozhong's idea is indeed effective. With this, they are all convinced. Striking while the iron is hot, Gu Fuxin did not allow them to overthink and continued. "Everyone knows that Princess Anil wants to be the imperial princess. Empress Wei is blinded by greed and also wants to be a female emperor. These women, instead of serving their husbands and giving birth to children, they want to create chaos in the world. Now, we are willing to serve Prince Xiang as our leader, Prince of Linzi as our marshal, and the great general who supports the country as our commander. We will avenge the late emperor and eradicate the rebels of the Wei family so that Li Tang can rule the world." What do all the generals think? The Wei faction is unpopular in the army. In addition, Empress Wei's nephews who became generals out of nowhere have committed treacherous acts, causing the entire army to resent them. Now that the bloody heads of Wei Bo, Wei Zhuo, and Gao Chong are on the table, the winged cavalry generals could not help but be tempted. However, taking this step is a matter of life and death. Being the first to stand out requires more courage than others. As a result, the generals looked left and right. Actually, once they are involved, the outcome will be the same regardless of whether they are the first to stand out. However, human nature is like this. It is human nature to seek good fortune and avoid calamity. If they are unwilling to stand out, there will naturally be others who will. Chen Xuanli is the first to stand out and loudly declared, "I am willing to serve Prince Yang as the minister of supports the country to kill the rebels and restore Li Tang." Immediately afterwards, the second bird that stood out, Li Xianfu, and the third bird that stood out, Xiong Mingwei, also stood out. When the generals saw this situation, the generals who had been bullied by Wei Bo and the others immediately responded. Gu Mingshan was overjoyed. "Good. In that case, we shall swear an oath to kill the rebels and protect Li Tang. Those who violate this oath shall have no descendants and be exterminated by both humans and gods." Chen Xuanli, Li Xianfu, and the rest took the lead in making the oath. Since the matter has come to this, the generals no longer hesitated. Seeing that the matter is about to succeed, Gu Mingshan happily turned around and cupped his fists to Yang Fan. "Great General, please give your instructions." In a clear voice, Yang Fan declared, "Good. Everyone, put your lives on the line. After the deed is done, riches and honor will be bestowed upon all of you. This general will bring the heads of the 3 rebels to see the Prince of Linzi. General Gu Fushin will be the center commander, and Chen Xuanli and Li Xianfu will be the deputy generals. Immediately assemble your troops and await further orders. Once the war drums are sounded in the Imperial Garden, you will charge into the palace with the 10,000 cavalry." In the Imperial Garden, Li Longji and the rest are anxiously waiting for news from the outside at Zhong Xiaojing's residence. As the commander-in-chief, Li Longji must not disturb the morale of his troops. Even though he is feeling anxious, he still pretends to be calm on the surface. His subordinates, on the other hand, do not need to conceal themselves and are like ants on a hot pan, pacing back and forth. Suddenly, Lu Youqiu, who was guarding the front door, rushed in. When he reached the door, he tripped on the door sill and almost fell. Fortunately, Xue Chongjian reacted quickly and rushed over to support him. Unable to sit still any longer, Li Longji sprang to his feet and stared at him anxiously. With a face full of joy, Lu Youqiu reported, "Regional Prince, the 10,000 cavalry have succeeded." Shortly after, Ma Qiao hurried over with a few retainers, carrying 2 bloody heads in his hands. Seeing Li Longji, Ma Qiao immediately raised the heads and loudly declared, "Regional Prince, the 10,000 cavalry have killed the 2 rebels, Wei Xian and Wei Jie. The 3 armies have assembled and await Regional Prince's orders." "Good, good." Li Longji was overjoyed and took 2 steps forward to take a closer look. Recognizing Wei Xian and Wei Jie's appearances, he could not help but burst into laughter. Li Longji faced the sky and laughed twice. Suddenly, his laughter stopped and he asked anxiously, "Where is Wu Yanxiu? Did he escape?" Ma Qiao hurriedly assured, "Regional Prince, do not worry. Wu Yanxiu did not escape. She is not in the army tonight. Wei Jie told me that Wu Yanxiu secretly entered the palace tonight and is fooling around with Princess Anil." Chapter 1196. Li Longji was relieved when he heard that the news hadn't been leaked. Even though there was still no news from the winged cavalry, Ren Baqian already had the tens of thousands of them under his control. As such, he felt much more relaxed. Li Longji encouraged Ma Qiao and told him to return to the 10,000 cavalry and await further orders. As soon as Ma Qiao left, Xue Chongjian, Lu Youqiu, Zhong Xiaojing, and the others gathered around Li Longji, their excitement evident on their faces. Even though Li Longji was very happy, he still tried his best to remain calm. He pretended to be calm and said, "Everyone, please don't be impatient. We still need to wait for news from the winged cavalry." At this moment, Zhong Xiaojing was much more at ease. A smile appeared on his face as he joked, "Your Highness, You are blessed by the heavens, and the general-in-chief, who supports the nation, is overseeing the winged cavalry camp. Nothing will go wrong. Everyone in Zhong Xiaojing's residence had finally calmed down because of Ma Qiao's arrival. After 1 hour, Yang Fan finally brought the 4 winged cavalry guards and 3 human heads back to the Imperial Gardens. Before Yang Fan could step through the door, Li Longji had already heard the news and came out to welcome him. When Yang Fan saw Li Longji, he immediately stopped in his tracks and cupped his hands in a fist salute. He loudly said, "This Yang was fortunate enough to not disappoint you. I have brought back the heads of Wei Bo, Wei Zhuo, and Gao Chong for the royal prince." Li Longji quickly walked to Yang Fan's side and grabbed his arms, his voice trembling with excitement. "Good, good, good. Great general, we've finally succeeded." Yang Fan smiled and said, "It's done. Now, we only need to wait for the regional king's command before we can send out the troops. How are things going on with the 10,000 cavalry?" Li Longji said repeatedly, "It went smoothly. Everything went smoothly. The 10,000 cavalry have already succeeded." When Yang Fan saw Li Longji's excited face, he reminded him, "Royal Prince, time is of the essence. Quickly give the order." Li Longji was reminded by Yang Fan's words. He quickly turned around and said, "Ma Xizong, beat the drums." "No, I'll do it myself." Li Longji rushed forward and picked up the drumsticks. Standing in front of the drum, he slowly raised his right arm and suddenly stopped. He took a deep breath and saw his chest slowly bulging. He swung his right arm down forcefully. Dong! Dong! Dong, 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 dong. The rapid beating of the drums pierced through the quiet night sky and rapidly spread into the distance. In the flying cavalry camp, Gofushin heard the beating of the war drums coming from the Imperial Garden. He unsheathed his saber with a chong sound and shouted, "Everyone, today is the day to make contributions. We will kill our way into the city and kill the Wei clique, no matter if they are men or women, old or young, as long as they are taller than a horsewhip. We will kill them all without mercy. Charge!" Gofushin led his troops and took the lead in charging towards the palace. According to the plan, the Flying Mount Battalion would be responsible for attacking Xuande Gate and entering the Taiji Palace from the East Palace. The 10,000 Cavalry Battalion would attack Jiao Gate and enter the Taiji Palace from the Yeding Palace. The reason for this arrangement was that the palace was not the same as before. Due to the death of the late emperor, he had not yet been buried. The morning hall was located in the palace, so there was 1,000 bull guard in charge of guarding the morning hall. At the critical moment, this 1,000 bull guard could very well become a variable in the coup. Moreover, even though Xuanwu Gate was under the control of the 10,000 cavalry, Yang Fan had learned from the failure of the Crown Prince's rebellion. In order to prevent Empress Wei from escaping with the young emperor, he and Li Longji led these 100 elites to enter through Xuanwu Gate. After the flying cavalry and 10,000 cavalry successfully entered the Taiji Palace, the flying cavalry loudly shouted the signal at Lingyan Pavilion. Li Longji, who was stationed at Xuanwu Gate, heard the news and immediately rushed over to join them. This way, the 3 routes formed a triangle. The emperor's resting palace, Ganlu Hall, was at the center of these 3 routes. This way, Empress Wei could not escape. Ganlu Hall was originally the resting palace of the emperor, but even though Li Zhongmao had ascended to the throne, he could only live in the East Palace. According to Empress Wei, the late emperor died in the empress's resting palace, Lijiang Hall. If she stayed in Lijiang Hall, she would often think of him and be too sad, damaging her phoenix body. As a result, she moved into Ganlu Hall. Those who were not forgetful would remember that back in Luoyang, Prince Yang Li Dan had been a puppet emperor for 8 years and lived in the East Palace as the emperor. The emperor's resting palace was occupied by the Empress Dowager Wu Zetian. Empress Wei imitated Wu Zetian and was always meticulous. After a round of drumming, Li Longji threw down the drumsticks and said in high spirits, "Come, let's go to Xuanwu Gate." Li Longji's 100 subordinates, were ready to go. Each person had a white handkerchief tied on their left arm as a symbol. They immediately rushed toward Xuanwu Gate in a clamor. Tonight, the commander on duty at Xuanwu Gate is Zhang Shidong. He was Yang Fan's comrade-in-arms when he went to the western regions. Now he has accumulated many merits and has been promoted to Lang General. There are more than 100 soldiers guarding Xuanwu Gate. Among them, there is a brigade commander and 2 squads who are Wei Jie's trusted aides. When Li Longji and the rest arrived at Xuanwu Gate, Zhang Shidong brazenly made his move. He ordered his trusted aides to kill a few of Wei Jie's men and open the gates wide for Li Longji to enter. Xue Chongjian, Zhong Xiaojing, Ma Xizong, Wang Chongye, and the rest surrounded Li Longji as they barged into Xuanwu Gate. Once they set up a formation outside the city walls, Zhang Shidong hurriedly descended the city walls to pay his respects to the Prince of Linzi and his old superior, Yang Fan. As usual, Yang Fan is dressed like a junior colonel. His left arm is also tied with a white handkerchief. To Li Longji he advised, "Your Highness can wait here. Once Pavilion Ling sends word, you will immediately mobilize your troops and launch a pincer attack on Sweet Du Hall. This general will go ahead and scout out the situation." Li Longji already had an appointment with him and naturally understood the reason for his departure. Taking a deep look at Yang Fan, he nodded. "The palace is too chaotic now. Great General must pay attention to your safety." Zhang Shitong anxiously protested, "Great General, please wait. Let this general deploy a few men to accompany Great General." Yang Fan chuckled. "I am not a weak scholar. 1 man and 1 sword is enough." As he spoke, Yang Fan walked away. He did not appear to be sprinting, but seemed to be walking slowly. Nonetheless, his speed is unbelievably fast. After saying enough, his figure has already disappeared into the boundless night. Yang Fan knows the Chang, an imperial palace, like the back of his hand. Along the way, he walked with ease and familiarity towards the place where Shanghai Wunner is on night duty. From afar, the sounds of killing shook the heavens. Many palace maids and eunuchs were startled and panicked when they heard the battle cries. They did not know what happened in the palace and did not know where the commotion broke out from. They just instinctively ran in the opposite direction of the battle cries, like frightened mice looking for a place to hide. Yang Fan did not expect the other 2 armies to enter the palace so quickly. Previously, because of Zhong Xiaojing's wavering and Wang Maozhong's desertion, Yang Fan was worried that this coup would be even more unsightly than Crown Prince Li Zhongjuan's failed rebellion. But the result was beyond his expectations. The Wei family's regime was like a walnut. The only hard part was the outer shell. Once it was cracked open, the insides would be vulnerable. The process of killing Wei Bo, Wei Jie, and the others was so smooth. The process of attacking the palace was also so smooth. The 3 valiant generals, Ma Qiao, Chu Kuanga, and Huang Xuchang, led 10,000 cavalrymen and broke through like a hot knife through butter. When the guards heard them shouting, "Empress Wei is happy, poison the former emperor to death. Kill the traitor Wei, restore Li Tang," they either abandoned their weapons and fled or changed sides at the last moment. If a ruler treats his subjects like dirt, then the subjects will treat the ruler like a bandit. The Wei family really did not treat their soldiers well. When the Wu family was in charge of the military, they were bossy and domineering to outsiders, but they were almost protective of their soldiers. But what about the Wei family? The Imperial Guard was the ultimate force that protected the imperial household and had always enjoyed all sorts of generous treatment. But after the Wei clan came to power, everyone in the Wei faction, from Wei Wen down, was greedy. They were even greedy for the pay of the soldiers of the Imperial Guard, so who would be willing to risk their lives for them? The general guarding the Suzhang Gate was called He Lu. He was a trusted aide of the Wei family. When he heard the cries of battle coming from Yeding Palace, he hurriedly put on his armor and climbed the walls. He ordered the gate to be tightly guarded while simultaneously sending a warning into the palace. But the soldiers guarding the gate were all former subordinates of Chu Kuanga, Ma Chiao, and the others. Chu Kuanga listed the crimes of the Wei clan and made a wish on behalf of the Prince of Xiang. At the top of the wall, a soldier surnamed Jin suddenly chopped off He Lu's head. The moment the Suzhang gate opened, the Taiji Palace was like a little girl whose hands had been tied and whose clothes had been taken off. It could only be ravaged by these rough soldiers. With a blade in one hand and a torch in the other, Ma Chiao charged at the very front. He had just run 100-some steps when several people rushed over. One of them yelled, "Who gave you permission to retreat? Quickly go back and defend the city. Anyone who disobeys will be executed." Then execute. Ma Chiao gave a strange laugh and threw the torch into the air. Gripping his blade with both hands, he leaped up like a tiger pouncing on its prey. With a whoosh, he leaped into the air and fiercely exhaled. With a forceful, cleaving Mount Hua, he slashed down at the head of the man who had given the order. This man held a sword in one hand and a lantern in the other. His clothes were disheveled, his hair disheveled, and he had not even put on a belt. He had heard the alarm and had come with several stout eunuchs wielding staffs. They were just about to rush to the Suzhang gate to supervise the battle. When he saw a group of people rushing over, he thought that the defenders had escaped. The Suzhang gate was one of the palace gates leading into Taiji Palace. The walls were extremely high and the palace gates were thick and heavy. Even if the defenders did not move and allowed them to attack, it would not be a matter of time for the people outside to rush in. How could they break in so quickly? Therefore, he instinctively thought that the newcomers were routed soldiers. He did not expect that these routed soldiers would actually dare to fight with him. He saw the man pouncing down from the sky like an eagle swooping down from the void. The sharp blade in his hand turned into a shadow, carrying with it a sharp whistle. He was so frightened that he gave a strange cry and raised his sword to meet the attack. The blade was light and agile. How could it collide with the edge of the blade? Moreover, Ma Chiao was holding the blade with both hands. His strength was great and his momentum was heavy. In his haste, the man could only raise his sword with one arm to block. With a crack, the scabbard tilted. In the midst of a miserable cry for fingers, and the sheathed sword fell to the ground. Before the sword fell to the ground, the saber had already smashed the sword away and cleaved squarely on the top of the man's head. Ma Chiao had learned superior saber techniques from Yang Fan, so his saber technique was extremely brilliant. The saber went all the way to the man's chest and was stuck by his sternum. A large head was cleaved in half by Ma Chiao's saber. The fat eunuchs following behind the man were stunned at first when they saw the scene. Then they let out a few sharp howls, threw away their rods, and ran away. As they ran, they screamed, "The prince consort is dead! The prince consort is dead!" At this time, Chu Kuanga and Huang Xuchang led their men to catch up. They lit a torch and illuminated the scene. Although the man with disheveled clothes and disheveled hair had been split in half from his brow to his chest, and there was a lot of blood splashed on his face, they could still see the two halves of his face. Chu Kuanga cried out, "Ah, it's Wu Yanxiu! Brother Chiao, you killed Wu Yanxiu. You've done a great service." It turned out that the first palace after entering Suzhang Gate was by Fu Hall. Princess Anil was currently living here. Wu Yanxiu had entered the palace tonight to make love with his wife and then stayed in the palace. Although this was against the rules, no one dared to control him. After hearing the alarm, Wu Yanxiu hurried to Suzhang Gate to supervise the battle. She didn't expect that she would be killed by Ma Chiao's saber. As soon as Ma Chiao heard that Wu Yanxiu had died to his saber, he couldn't help but laugh. Huang Xuchang enviously called out, "You've already taken the lead. You're not allowed to fight with me for the next one." Having said that, he exerted strength in his legs and rushed to the front. Chapter 1197. The place where Li Xian's coffin was placed was the Divine Dragon Hall. The Divine Dragon Hall was to the left of the Hall of Dew, but because of the size of the palace, it was 3 or 4 li away. There were about 400 soldiers of the 1,000 Ox Guard stationed here. In the palace, this could be considered an extremely powerful force. These 400 people were the ceremonial guards of the Son of Heaven's morning hall. But the weapons they used were all real, just wrapped in a layer of white silk. Thus, once they entered battle, they would be of great use. After Gu Fuxin, Chen Xuanli, Li Xianfu, and the others entered the palace from the Xuanda sect, the greatest test they had to face was this ceremonial guard that guarded the Son of Heaven's coffin, the 1,000 Ox Guard. Gu Fuxin killed his way in, and it was even smoother than Chu Kuanga and Ma Qiao's group. Along the way, they almost didn't encounter any decent resistance. Occasionally they would fight, but it wasn't because the palace guards were sincerely protecting their master, but because they didn't know where to run and instinctively fought back. This kind of sporadic resistance naturally couldn't stop Gu Fuxin's group. They didn't stop until they reached the Divine Dragon Hall. Here, they encountered the 400,000 Ox Guard that had already assembled. Seeing that the 1,000 Ox Guard was in a tight formation, Gu Fuxin immediately stopped his men from moving. The two sides were separated by nearly 20 paces, forming a tight formation. Sabers and spears were raised, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. It seemed like a fight could break out at any moment. Gu Fuxin took 5 steps forward with his saber and shouted, "Empress Wei Enenlud, in order to be the Empress Dowager and Empress Dowager, brazenly poisoned Emperor Xian to death. My 10,000 cavalry and flying cavalry, under the orders of His Highness the Prince of Xiang, who assists the government, want to kill the Wei faction. Your 1,000 Ox Guard is in charge of the Imperial Saber and attendants, and you are the Emperor's personal army. Now that the Son of Heaven has died, are you willing to join us in killing the rebel and protecting Li Tang, or are you going to defy the heavens?" Gu Fuxin's words immediately caused an uproar among the 1,000 Ox Guard. The soldiers of the 1,000 Ox Guard didn't know if Gu Fuxin's words were true or false, but after the Son of Heaven's sudden death, there was much criticism among the people. Hearing Gu Fuxin's words, they couldn't help but somewhat believe him. If it was just based on Gu Fuxin's words, even if they half believed and half doubted him, it would not immediately destroy their morale. But what was worse was that they were guarding the Emperor's coffin and had just provoked a bellyful of anger. Organizing the Emperor's funeral was a lucrative job. The people of the Wei family would not let go of such a good opportunity. This matter was taken over by the brother-in-law of Empress Wei's nephew, Wei Bo. The ceremonial soldier was guarding the coffin in the palace. He was also in charge of the food and lodging. Not only did he not deliver the 3 meals on time, making the soldiers' stomachs rumble with hunger. Furthermore, the food was often cold. Today he was even more excessive. He actually sent some leftovers that had been eaten by others without even heating them up. How could the soldiers of the 1,000 Ox Guard endure this? They began to make a ruckus, but they were humiliated by the royal relative who had nothing to fear. Due to the other party's power, they could do nothing. However, this hatred continued to accumulate in their hearts. Now that they heard Gu Fuxin say this, new and old hatred immediately surged into their hearts. Gu Fuxin saw that his words had caused the hearts of the 1,000 Ox Guard to waver and their morale to plummet. He couldn't help but be secretly happy. He hurriedly made a gesture with his hand behind his back. Chen Xuanli had known him for a long time and immediately understood when he saw the gesture. He immediately ordered the soldiers to advance. The flying cavalry saber and shield bearers held a saber in one hand and a shield in the other. They used their sabers to strike the surface of the shield rhythmically. With every step they took, they shouted, "Execute the rebel! Protect Li Tang! Execute the rebel! Protect Li Tang!" Chu Kai, the commander of the 1,000 Ox Guard, took a step back in panic. He suddenly turned his gaze behind him. Behind him, the 3 brigade marshals were looking at him strangely. Their gazes were restless and unwilling. Chu Kai suddenly gritted his teeth and raised his hands high in the air. When Chen Xuanli saw this, He immediately stopped the soldiers from advancing. Chu Kai turned around and shouted, "Brothers, we are the Emperor's personal guards, not the private army of the Wei family. We eat the Emperor's salary and are loyal to the Emperor. I want to rebel with the brothers of the 10,000 cavalry and flying cavalry. What do you say?" The 400 warriors of the 1,000 Ox Guard were silent. A moment later, the 3 brigade marshals suddenly raised their arms and shouted, "Rebel against her! Rebel against her! Rebel against her!" Tonight was destined to be an unforgettable night for Empress Wei. Although she had 2 young and handsome lovers, she had never slept together and played the absurd game of a threesome. But tonight, she called for Ma Qingge and Yang Jun to serve her in bed with some shyness and some apprehension. She finally had a different taste. "Emperor, this is the right of an emperor." Empress Wei, who was as soft as mud, lay paralyzed on the bed. She looked at her 2 lovers with seductive eyes. The shyness unique to women had completely disappeared. She, Madame Wei, was not inferior to Wu Zetian. Everything that Wu Zetian had, she also wanted to have. Wu Zetian had enjoyed too, so she wanted to have Ma and Yang. When Wu Zetian ascended to the throne, she was already in her 60s. She was only in her early 40s. She still had a lot of time to enjoy. She was confident that she could create an even greater glory than Wu Zetian and not let Wu Meinyang monopolize her beauty. Ha ha ha! Thinking of her pride, Empress Wei couldn't help but laugh. Yang Jun asked jokingly, "Why is Nyang Yang laughing?" Empress Wei said intimately, "Isn't it because I am being served by you, my enemy, that I am abnormally beautiful? That's why," before Empress Wei could finish, a eunuch disregarded the order to enter the palace and ran in a panic. With a thud, he knelt on the ground and shouted in panic, "Nyang Nyang, something bad has happened. The palace has changed. The palace has changed." When Empress Wei heard of the palace change, her already limp body somehow found strength and sat up. She asked with a pale face, "Who is rebelling?" The eunuch said in a trembling voice, "Newbie doesn't know. News came from Suzhong Gate that the 10,000 cavalry have rebelled and are attacking the palace gates." Empress Wei finally realized that she was completely naked and quickly pulled over the thin blanket to cover her body. Yang Jun was a martial artist and had great courage. He immediately jumped to the ground, not caring that he was naked. He said urgently, "Nyang Nyang, quickly change your clothes. This subject will protect Nyang Nyang for a while." For a moment, the 3 of them didn't care that there was still a eunuch kneeling on the ground and hurriedly searched for clothes. Empress Wei didn't need the palace maids to serve her. She hastily put on her clothes and really looked ugly. After they had put on their clothes, they were led out of the palace by the eunuch. They saw many of the palace maids and eunuchs in the hall of suite do scurrying around like ants on a hot pan. Empress Wei was furious and was about to curse when she was dragged up by Yang Fan and rushed out of the hall with her feet barely touching the ground. By this time, Suzhong Gate had been breached. Ma Qiao, Chu Kuanga, and the others were attacking by Fu Hall, but the east side was a sheet of silence. Yang Jun made a prompt decision and said, "Nyang Nyang, the 10,000 cavalry rebel army is on the west side. The Shanlong Hall on the east side has 400,000 ox guards. We only need to let them stand guard, and it will be enough to ensure Nyang Nyang's safety until the troops to rescue the emperor arrive. Let's go to the Shenlong Hall." What they didn't know was that the direction of the Shenlong Hall was abnormally silent right now was because the 1,000 ox guards had just rebelled and were joining forces with the winged cavalry. They were also acting as the vanguard, attacking Suite Du Hall. Yang Jun and Ma Qingge supported Empress Wei and hastily fled. Behind them, many palace maids and eunuchs also chased after them like stray dogs. When they reached a long and spacious courtyard between the Hall of Sweet Dew and the Divine Dragon Hall, suddenly they saw the torches ahead like a dragon, moving swiftly towards them. Ma Qingge was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "Oh no, there are also rebels here." Yang Jun took a closer look. Under the light of the torch, He saw many people wearing mourning belts on their waists and mourning scarves on their heads. The weapons in their hands were also wrapped in white silk. He could not help but was greatly delighted. "It's not a rebellion," he said. "It's the 1,000 ox guards who have come to rescue the emperor." Empress Wei was so frightened by Ma Qingge's words that her face paled and she almost fell to the ground. Hearing Yang Jun's words, her spirits rose again. She quickly struggled free of the support of the two and cheerfully went forward, shouting loudly, "Aijia is here. 1,000 bull guards, quickly protect the emperor." Gu Fuxin, Li Xinfu, and the defecting 1,000 bull guard Captain Chu Kai were rushing forward when they suddenly saw a few lanterns coming towards them, following which a tall and slender figure cried out, "Aijia," in a tender voice. Their hearts skipped a beat. Aijia, other than Empress Wei, who else can it be? The three of them were like wolves that had been starved for an entire winter. They rushed out at the same time. That was Empress Wei, chief merit. If he killed her, he might even be conferred the title of king. Empress Wei, conferred the title of king. Conferred the title of king. Empress Wei. The three fierce generals held sharp blades in their hands and ferociously pounced at the prey in their eyes. No one knew who had made the first strike or who had delivered the fatal blow. Huang Xuchang was sprinting in the direction of Baifu Hall when he suddenly discovered that a few lanterns were moving towards Taiji Hall, like Willow, the wisps. His heart couldn't help but move. At this time, many of the palace maids and eunuchs were running for their lives. Along the way, Huang Xuchang had encountered several of them. He was too lazy to pay attention to these servants and maids. But these palace maids and eunuchs scattered in all directions in panic. They would not form groups and rarely carried lanterns. In the distance, the lanterns faintly illuminated some human figures. It was clearly a group of people. Also, if they were palace maids or eunuchs, they could just hide behind water jars, shrubs, or fake mountains for a while, regardless of who won or lost. After the dust settled, they wouldn't make things difficult for them. There was no need to run towards Taiji Hall. That was the great hall where the Son of Heaven came to court. Huang Xuchang thought, could it be Empress Wei? Huang Xuchang was a straightforward person. As he thought about it, he gave chase. As he chased after that group of people, he shouted loudly, "Quickly chase! Don't let Empress Wei escape." Behind him, Ma Qiao, Chu Kuanga, and the others didn't know what was going on. When they suddenly saw Huang Xuchang running in the direction of Taiji Hall and shouting something about Empress Wei, they thought he had really discovered something and immediately gave chase like a swarm of bees. In reality, the person running towards Taiji Hall was Princess Anil. As soon as Baifu Hall received the warning, Wu Yanqiu hurried to Suzhang Gate to supervise the battle. Princess Anil waited in Baifu Hall for a while. Suddenly, she felt somewhat uneasy. If the rebel army can't enter the palace, I will naturally be fine. But if the rebel army enters the palace, what should I do? Princess Anil, who had already experienced Crown Prince Li Zhongjuan's rebellion, was calm. After a moment's thought, she took a few personal eunuchs and palace maids and fled in the direction of Taiji Hall. She didn't go to Suzhang Gate to accompany her husband because she knew very well that once Suzhang Gate was breached, her husband would undoubtedly die. She didn't want to die yet. She also didn't go to Ganlu Hall to see her mother because she knew that once the rebel army entered the palace, her mother would be the biggest target. She didn't want to be implicated by her mother. Thus she chose Taiji Hall. Although Taiji Hall was where the Son of Heaven summoned all the officials, where the Son of Heaven issued his grand policies and issued his orders, it was only an empty hall at night, not an important place that the rebel army paid attention to. And Li's wishful thinking was to find a place to hide in Taiji Hall. It would soon be daybreak, and the palace was so large that it would be very difficult for the rebel army to find her. As long as she could successfully hide until daybreak, until all the officials entered the court, she would be safe. She knew that the only person qualified to rebel was the Prince of Xiang. If she died in the chaos, no one would say anything. But in front of the officials, her uncle would definitely not give the order to execute his niece, a defenseless woman. Gua might not have great wisdom, but he was rather clever. Chapter 1198. As Princess and Lu passed through Yinyang Gate and was about to reach Taiji Hall, a eunuch suddenly screamed, "Princess, it's not good. There are pursuers behind us." Princess and Lu ran until her hair was in disarray, sweating profusely. She quickly turned her head to look and saw dozens of flames leaping and chasing in her direction. And Li's shock was no small matter. Her brain worked quickly, and she immediately ordered, "Quick, you all go to Taiji Hall." The eunuch was startled and said, "What about Princess?" And Lu was furious and shouted, "Go quickly. You don't need to ask where Ben Gong is going. Otherwise, I'll beat you to death." The eunuch didn't dare to disobey and turned around in a daze, leading a group of eunuchs and palace maids towards Taiji Hall. And Lu continued forward, passing by Taiji Hall but not entering, instead running towards Yanming Gate in front of Taiji Hall. Past Yanming Gate was Taiji Hall. Between Yanming Gate and Taiji Hall, there were imperial guards on night duty. Of course, because Yanming Gate was locked, even if the soldiers outside were loyal to Weisher, they wouldn't be able to enter unless someone opened the gate from the inside. But for this kind of palace gate, just the heavy bolts would require 6 or 7 strong men to move down, not to mention the giant locks. And Lu wouldn't be able to get out. She only wanted those lantern-carrying eunuchs and palace maids to attract the pursuers like fireflies, while she would find a place to hide between Yanming Gate and Taiji Hall. Behind the giant pillars, under the railings, next to the stone beasts, as long as there was a place to hide, she could drag it out until morning court. But those eunuchs and palace maids were lowly in status. They weren't idiots that could be manipulated by others. They naturally understood Princess and Li's intentions. No one was willing to die for nothing. They only ran a few steps before throwing their lanterns and scattering like birds and beasts. Huang Xuchang and the others were even more certain that there was a big fish here. As they continued to chase, they spread out in formation to prevent anyone from escaping. Like a net, they surged forward. In a short while, they caught 2 palace maids. Huang Xuchang asked the palace maid and learned that the one who had fled here was Princess and Lu. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. Then he thought, and Lu might not be as important as Empress Wei, but she was still an important person in Wei's faction. Killing her would be a great merit. He quickly ordered people to continue the search. When Chu Kuanga caught up with them, he had Su Liang and Lu Maofeng lead the main force to continue in the direction of the Hall of Sweet Dew. There was no need to worry about affecting the entire coup plan, so he and Ma Chiao also led their personal soldiers to join the search. The 3 of them each led a troop and headed in 3 different directions. Not long later, they heard Huang Xuchang's loud laughter coming from Yanming's faction. "This contribution belongs to me, old Huang. It's destined that no one can take it away from me." When Chu Kuanga heard the voice, he immediately led his men and rushed over. He saw Huang Xuchang with a dozen or so people, holding torches and forming a circle. Chu Kuanga squeezed his way in and said, "Old Huang, why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and gather at the Ganlu Palace Hall. The winged cavalry are still." At this point, Chu Kuanga's voice abruptly stopped. He had already squeezed into the middle of the crowd. What he saw wasn't a corpse, but a person kneeling and a beauty kneeling on the ground. And Lu escaped from Baifu Palace in a hurry and didn't even wear her clothes neatly. She was only wearing a white undergarment made of the most expensive and silky mermaid muslin. There weren't any patterns or other colors on it, and it didn't need any other adornments because the person wearing it was the most beautiful woman in the world. The mermaid muslin was thin and translucent, and her jade-like body was faintly discernible. She was kneeling on the ground. Her soft and beautiful hair and soft clothes stuck to her curvaceous and delicate body, outlining her soft and graceful curves. She was extremely beautiful. Chu Kuanga finally understood why Huang Xuchang was in a daze. Who could bear to lay a hand on such a woman? Even though he knew very well what she had done, and that her peerless beauty was just a shell, he still couldn't bear to lay a hand on her. Li Guier knelt on the ground and deliberately lowered her small waist, making her slender waist as thin as a hook and making her round buttocks even more round and graceful. She knew how to show her beauty very well. Her hands were on the ground, but her face was raised. Her incomparably beautiful face was extremely pale. She timidly knelt there, like a harmless jade rabbit, whoever her delicate and pitiful eyes swept over. That person couldn't help but drop the knife in their hand. Not only could they not bear to lay a hand on her, they couldn't even bear to point their sharp weapons at her. Chu Kuanga and Huang Xuchang had seen Princess and Lu before, although they were far away at that time, and they didn't dare to stare at a noble princess. They had still seen her before. But at that time, although they were stunned when they saw Enlil, the feeling they had now was completely different. The beautiful princess who was dressed in splendid clothes and was insufferably arrogant, and the beautiful woman kneeling on the ground in disheveled clothes, delicate and pitiful and full of femininity, gave people a completely different feeling. At this moment, the beauty and pitifulness she displayed was so thrilling. Huang Xuchang's voice was a little tense. Old Chu, old Huang, don't want this credit. You do it, Huang Xuchang said as he turned around. Not only could he not bear to see Chu Kuanga kill people, he could not even bear to say the word kill to this extremely perfect woman. General, 2 crystal-clear tears suddenly rolled down Li's jade dimples. She sobbed and said, "And Lu is just a harmless and weak woman. Those princes and princes can fight if they want to. Why must they implicate an innocent woman like me? General, do you have the heart to raise a butcher's knife against me?" With tears streaming down her face, she crawled in front of Chu Kuanga and hugged his thigh. The snow-white and soft mermaid veil was slightly opened because of her movements, revealing a charming semicircle of breasts. They were whiter than the first snow and more moist than jade. Under the flickering light of the torch, just one look and it seemed as if a delicate fragrance could be smelled. Chu Kuanga's arm was thicker than her thigh. He did not need to use a knife at all. He only needed to use one hand to break Li's neck. However, the tendons on his arm tightened like a green snake, and he still could not pull out the knife in the sheath. Chu Kuanga retreated 2 steps in a sorry state, broke free from her hands, raised his head, and looked at the bright stars in the sky. His Adam's apple swallowed hard, and with great difficulty he ordered, "Dai Chonghua, you do it!" Dai Chonghua was the captain of his bodyguards. At this moment he was standing beside him. Dai Chonghua listened to Chu Kuanga's order, and the knife suddenly flashed with brilliance under the light of the torch. It was obvious that he could not even hold the knife steadily. Dai Chonghua did not dare to disobey, but when he saw Princess Li's sad, desolate, and extremely beautiful eyes, he could not do it. Military orders were like a mountain, and her beauty could even resist a mountain. When Dai Chonghua was young, he had heard a story from his grandfather. It said that in ancient times there was a demoness, Deji, who brought disaster to the imperial court. King Wu captured her when he conquered Zhou, but no one could bear to kill her. Dai Chonghua had always thought that this was a very funny legend, but now he finally believed that such a woman really existed in this world. Dai Chonghua turned his head and ordered his subordinates, "Do it! Kill her!" A few loyal bodyguards who killed without batting an eye looked at each other in dismay. They were either holding knives or spears, but no one was willing to take the credit. Princess Li's heart relaxed, and she was secretly pleased. These men could not resist her charm in the end. Their lives could be saved. She had absolute confidence in her beauty. She believed that with her beauty, she would always be successful in front of men, except for that blind young fan. As long as she did not die today, she was confident that she could regain supreme power and honor. She could seduce her uncle Li Dan. She could seduce her cousin, who was about to be made the crown prince, and she could make the new sovereign of the world fall head over heels for her. When the time came, she would still be rich and powerful. All the men whom she had begged on her knees today, who had seen her unsightly state, would all be eliminated by her, just like those generals and their bodyguards who had once guarded Yellow Bamboo Ridge. She gracefully stood up. She was surrounded by fully armored and blood-stained soldiers, but she was a woman of indescribable charm. Hardness and softness formed an intense contrast. The light from the fire shone on her body, bright, round, slender, and shadowy, forming a picture of peerless beauty. She elegantly raised her neck, closed her beautiful eyes, and mournfully said, "Since the generals have captured me, why not hand me over to the Prince of Xiang for judgment? If Uncle really wants to kill Enlil, then Enli's death is fine. If the generals want to use Enli's head to raise their rank, then please do it." Her slender neck was raised like a white swan in despair, but the beauty she displayed to these men was not the pure and poignant beauty. Her waist was purposefully lowered to accentuate the round and straight buttocks. Her chest was high and did not conceal her half-naked breasts. From top to bottom, there was not a part of her body that was not seductive. "If you won't kill her, I will." A deep shout suddenly rang out. Princess Enlil let out an sound. Her eyes suddenly widened, and she lowered her head in fear, looking at the long knife that had pierced through her chest. Then she slowly raised her head, looking at the man in front of her in disbelief. The blade was grasped in a powerful hand. She did not recognize the person holding the blade. He was not handsome, but he had a courageous and fierce aura. His hand firmly gripped the blade, but his head was slightly tilted, not looking at her eyes. The killer, Ma Chiao. The matter between Yang Fan and Enlil was only known to this brother of Yang Fan's that had a different surname. He knew how cunning this woman was, how vengeful she was. He also knew that this woman possessed a charm that almost no man could resist. As long as this woman was still alive, there would be no end to her troubles. Ma Chiao knew that if there was any man in the world who would be willing to kill her, it would definitely be Yang Fan. But because of the ill-fated relationship between her and Yang Fan would definitely not do it. Thus, he could only do it for his brother, and put an end to any future troubles. Wu Yanxiu had died at his hand, and Princess Enlil would also die at his hand. In the end, both husband and wife would die under the same blade. Princess Enlil collapsed to the ground in despair. She did not want to go to the Yellow Springs with her husband, but in the end, she still had to reluctantly go. As the world spun and she collapsed to the ground, she suddenly saw a figure rushing over from the distance, an abnormally familiar figure. Chapter 1199. Ma Chiao brazenly thrust his knife through Enli's extremely beautiful body that no one could bear to hurt. He was like a rough man who didn't know how to appreciate beauty, and viciously smashed an unparalleled blue and white porcelain. When that exquisite porcelain fell to the ground, it didn't just destroy her life, it also awakened the rationality of Chu Kuanga and the others. Chu Kuanga lost no time in raising his arms and shouting, "Empress Wei Enlil is insane." In order to usurp the throne, she didn't hesitate to poison the previous emperor. Now that Enlil is dead, as long as we kill Empress Wei, the country's vengeance can be avenged and the great event can be expected. We will quickly kill our way to the Hall of Sweet Dew. Just at this moment, a figure flew over like the wind. A soldier, standing at the periphery, only saw a figure flash in front of him like a ghost. Without thinking, he brandished his saber and chopped down. Unexpectedly, just as he raised his saber, that person had already brushed past him and suddenly stood still in the crowd. The soldier looked under the light of the torch and saw that the person was Great General Yang Fan. He was really shocked and quickly looked around. Seeing that everyone's gaze was attracted by Yang Fan, he stuck out his tongue and sheathed his knife. Yang Fan came in through the Black Tortoise Gate and wanted to go to Hong Wenguan to see Wanner. Hong Wenguan and Shiguan were adjacent to each other, just to the left of Tai Chi Palace. Yang Fan entered through the Black Tortoise Gate and passed through Cloud Gazing Pavilion, Kaisi Hall, Returning Nature Hall, Peace Hall, 100 Blessings Hall, Tai Chi Palace. He walked in a straight line until he turned left here and was Hong Wenguan, where Wanner was on duty. When Yang Fan arrived, he saw dozens of generals holding torches in a circle. They all had a white handkerchief on their left arm. He knew that they were the soldiers of the 10,000 cavalry, so he came to investigate. Great General! When Chu Kuanga and Huang Xuchang saw Yang Fan, they were extremely happy. Yang Fan nodded to them and looked at Enlu, who was lying on the ground. What entered his eyes was a shocking patch of red, and he immediately froze. Ma Qiao didn't expect Yang Fan to arrive at this time. He was slightly surprised and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Great General, you're here!" Yang Fan glanced at him. The two of them had been brothers for more than 10 years and had long understood each other. With just one glance, Yang Fan understood his painstaking efforts and could only sigh inwardly. He stretched out his hand to take the torch from the hands of an imperial soldier and said in a deep voice, "There are battle cries coming from the left of Sweet Dew Hall. All of you, quickly go and provide support." "Yes." Ma Qiao acknowledged and lowered his head to look at Enlu. Seeing that she was on the verge of death and her face was as pale as a sheet of paper, he knew that it was impossible for her to survive. Only then did he feel relieved and shouted, "Brothers, let's go and support our winged cavalry brothers!" Dozens of imperial guards followed Ma Qiao and flew away. Yang Fan slowly squatted down and looked at Enlu with some pity. Enli's face was abnormally pale. That deliberate act of seduction had long since disappeared. Because her beautiful face had lost all color, it gave off a desolate feeling. "Erlang, am I going to die?" Enlu, who was lying on the ground, saw Yang Fan and asked with difficulty. Yang Fan's gaze fell on her chest. Seeing that bloody wound, his eyes suddenly narrowed. Even though he did not answer, his eyes had already explained everything. Enlu understood. She quietly gazed at Yang Fan and suddenly mournfully said, "I am afraid of suffering. I am afraid of death. In this world, I only love one person, and that is myself. I want to have all the glory and splendor in this world, but," she smiled bitterly and said, "when I have no choice but to die, I realize that what I am afraid of is not scary, and what I love is not cute. What I have always wanted is actually flowers in the mirror and the moon reflected in the water." Yang Fan believed that what she said was the truth. At this time, there was no need for her to lie. But Yang Fan also knew that this was just a kind of realization she had when she was about to die. If she could survive, if she could once again have the power and wealth she wanted, she would definitely return to her old ways and even become worse. But Yang Fan did not want to say anything harsh to her. No matter what, she was really going to die. At least at this moment, she had really thrown away vanity, ruthlessness, greed, and lasciviousness. At this moment, she was real. "You don't believe me?" Even at her last breath, Enli's senses were still sharp. She noticed Yang Fan's silence. Yang Fan shook his head and said in a low voice, "You understand what you should not pursue, but do you understand what you should pursue?" Enlu looked at Yang Fan with a perplexed expression. After a while, she slowly shook her head and said, "It wasn't my will to come to this world. And it wasn't my will to leave this world either. I don't understand why I had to come to this world. I don't know." She was a princess of the Tang dynasty, but when she was born, she was on a bumpy road to Fangzhou. Her father was so down and out that he could only use his own clothes as a swaddling cloth to welcome her when she was born. She was a princess of the Tang dynasty, but when she died, she lay on the stone steps in front of Taiji Palace. Other than Yang Fan, no one saw her off. No one had taught her how to be a person. Even in death, she did not understand how to be a person. I didn't kill my father," and Lu felt that her life was like the blood that flowed out of her body. It was about to flow to the end. Her eyes were so heavy that she could not open them, but she struggled with all her might and used the last of her strength to defend herself. Yang Fan nodded deeply and said in a low voice, "I know." And Lu suddenly opened her eyes. Even though she was on the verge of death, when she used her most beautiful eyes to stare at him, there was still a kind of breathtaking beauty that made one's heart palpitate. "You believe me?" Yang Fan nodded again and said in a low voice, "Perhaps this is the only truth that you and I have ever said since we met, but I believe you." And Lu smiled, her eyes beginning to scatter. It was as if she could see through Yang Fan's face and see an even more distant place. "I really want to return to the day we first met. I promise, no matter if I am a good woman or a bad woman, I will never lie to you again, forever." The smile blossoming on her incomparably beautiful face froze, still dazzling the world. Empress Wei thought that her savior had come, but she had not expected that the regime that she had thought to be as stable as Mount Tai would collapse at the first blow. Even the 1,000 bull guards that guarded the coffin of the previous emperor could change sides at the last moment. She struggled free of Ma Chinka's support and walked forward alone. Originally, she had wanted to maintain the dignity of the Empress Dowager in front of the soldiers. Unexpectedly, the 3 generals that rushed forward did not bow to her, but brazenly raised the butcher's knives in their hands. It was impossible to determine who had made the first strike in this chaotic darkness. People could only confirm that the last person to put away his knife was Chu Kai. Chu Kai had changed sides halfway and naturally wanted to appear more resolute than the others. When Chu Kai put away his knife, Empress Dowager Wei, who had always dreamed of following Wu Zetian's path, had been chopped into pieces. Someone as noble as her had died lower than a pig. Ma Chinka and Yang Jun saw this scene and were so frightened their souls almost left their bodies. A moment later, Yang Jun was the first to react and immediately ran. Ma Chinka, who had reacted slightly slower, was killed by the swarming 1,000 bull guards. After Gu Fushin chopped off Empress Wei's head, he immediately rushed to Lingyan Pavilion. He ordered people to loudly send out the signal. Li Longji, Xue Xingjian, and the others who were guarding the Black Marshal Gate heard the signal and immediately started to attack in the direction of Sweet Du Hall. By the time Li Longji arrived at Sweet Du Hall, Su Liang, Lu Maofeng, Gu Fushin, Chen Xuanli, and 1,000 bull guards had all arrived and successfully joined forces with Sweet Du Hall. Gu Fushin rushed in front of Li Longji and presented Empress Wei's head with both hands, shouting, "Junwang, the head of the rebellious consort Wei Shi is here." Ah! When Li Longji saw Empress Wei's head, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. With the death of this core member of the Wei faction, tonight's coup would be 70% successful. At this time, Ma Qiao, Chu Kuanga, and Huang Xuchang also arrived and presented him Wu Yanqiu's head, informing him of Princess and Li's death. Li Longji's heart was greatly reassured. He immediately ordered the armies to use Sweet Du Hall as the center to sweep out the remnants of the Wei faction. He also ordered the Southern Yamen Imperial Army to start moving and encircle the ministers of the Wei faction. Li Longji might be young, but he was methodical in giving orders. When the generals received their orders and left, Xue Xingjian excitedly came out of the rear palace. He had already found the emperor's imperial seal. Li Longji took the imperial seal with him and immediately led his bodyguards to Taiji Hall. When he arrived, Lu Youqiu brought young Emperor Li Zhongmao from the Crown Prince's palace. Li Zhongmao was a 15-year-old youth who lived in Fangzhou. Although his circumstances improved later, because he was the son of a concubine, he was not favored by Empress Wei and Enlil, so he was oppressed deeply. Even as the emperor, he was still a puppet, so he had no opinions of his own and was timid. Compared to his cousin, Li Longji, he was far inferior. "Junwang, I have found the young emperor," Lu Youqiu whispered to Li Longji. "Now that the palace is in a mess, do you want to?" Lu Youqiu put his palm together like a knife and made a cutting gesture. Hearing this, Li Longji's heart palpitated. If young Emperor Sheng Mao died in the chaos, Li Xian's line would only have Prince Qiao, Li Zhongfu, who was far away in Lingnan. In that case, wouldn't it be even easier for his father to ascend the throne? But he cast a sidelong glance at the terrified and pale-faced Li Zhongmao and forcefully resisted this temptation. I can't, at least not tonight. Tonight's execution of Wei Dang is already imminent, and the authority will inevitably return to father. At that time, with aunt's persuasion, it may be possible to persuade my father, and Li Zhongmao may not necessarily be killed. Moreover, to ascend to the throne, he must have a legitimate reason. If the young emperor dies in the palace, no matter how he died, it will cause a lot of criticism. Li Zhongmao must live, not die. Thinking of this, Li Longji said resolutely, "No, protect the young emperor." Lu Youqiu was stunned, but seeing Li Longji's resolute expression, he did not dare to say anything else and could only agree. At this time, the sky was just beginning to brighten, and the sounds of fighting in the palace had gradually stopped. Except for a few soldiers who were still searching the palace, the operation to wipe out the Wei faction had begun to spread out of the palace. It seemed that Chu Kuanga, Li Xianfu, and the others had each led a group of soldiers to hunt down Wei Wen. Ji Qina, Zongchuk, Zhao Wen, and the other Wei faction's diehard followers. In Chang and the obvious clan and the hidden clan's operation to kill Lu Bin's faction had also come to an end. The bloody killings had perfectly blended into the coup tonight. By dawn, the imperial court would be in chaos, and the new and old would be replaced. No one would care about these things anymore. At that time, it would be impossible to find out, and no one would be insensible enough to investigate whether these killings had anything to do with the coup that night. In fact, no one would be insensible enough to report these things to the new ruler. Li Longji stood on the high stone steps of the Taiji Palace, looking at the majestic Taiji Gate. A ray of dawn was piercing through the clouds, shining on the glazed tiles of the palace gate, shining with golden light. The sun was about to rise, and a new day, a new emperor, and a new era was about to begin. The generals around him would all become the mainstays of the new regime. But Li Longji subconsciously looked in the direction of the Hongwen school. That general was about to leave the imperial court. Li Longji really hoped that his father's new regime would receive Yang fan support. Moreover, ever since he was young, he had always admired this rather legendary general. However, he also knew that this general had already made great contributions and could not be conferred a title. Perhaps returning with glory was the best choice for him and the imperial family to live in harmony forever. Seeing that Li Longji seemed to be deep in thought as he looked at the Hongwen school, Lu Youqiu hurriedly said, "Your Highness, Shanghai Wanner is on duty in the palace tonight. If she did not escape after hearing about the chaos, she should be there right now." Li Longji non-committally replied with a Lu Youqiu continued, "This woman has been through the Wu and Wei dynasties, and she has been in charge of Qinhan. She is responsible for the military and the country strategies, and she has killed many people. She has been involved in many imperial edicts. Although she is a woman, she is still an important minister of the country. Do you want me to capture her?" Li Longji smiled faintly and said in a low voice, "No, I will go see her myself." Chapter 1200. Hongwen Library has more than 200,000 books. There is a library master who is in charge of the library affairs. There are dozens of students, all of whom are members of the royal family and high-ranking officials. They follow the scholars to learn Confucian classics, history, and calligraphy. Today, the library master of Hongwen Library has always been one. When she is on duty in the palace, she also stays here. At night, Hongwen Library is especially tranquil. The scholars and students are not allowed to stay in the palace at night. Therefore, Hongwen Library only has Shu Xiaomiao and Fu Qingqing as companions. Once night fell, Wanner anxiously waited. How could she sleep peacefully? She could only put on her clothes and occasionally walk to the stairs outside the room. She gazed into the distance, her eyebrows furrowed with worry. She is well aware of what will happen tonight. However, she cannot predict whether it will succeed or not. This is why she is especially worried for Yang Fan. She does not have to worry about her own safety. If the Prince of Lin Zi succeeds, she will regain her freedom. If the Prince of Lin Zi fails, Wei Dang will not know of her relationship with the rebels and will not implicate her. But if that happened, her plan to stay with Yang Fan forever would come to naught. Unless Empress Wei was willing to let her leave the palace, she, who had the enormous responsibilities of the family, could not abandon everything and elope with Yang Fan. When the sounds of fighting rose in the palace, Wanner, who was in the silence of the night, could clearly hear the sounds of fighting coming from afar. Her heart immediately jumped with excitement. From the source of the sounds, she knows that the Wan Qi and the winged cavalry have successfully entered the palace. This gave her much hope. Fu Qingqing and Xu Xiaomiao are her absolute confidants. However, Wanner did not explain the details to them. She only summoned them to her side at night and gave them some vague instructions. With their intelligence, they should have guessed something. In this long night, the two of them could not fall asleep. When the sound of fighting faintly came to their dormitory, they could not help but put on their clothes and come out. Before they could look into the distance, they found Wanner standing on the stone steps. Hearing the footsteps, Wanner did not turn around. She only said, "Tonight there will be chaos. The two of you go to the hall. Without my summons, do not come out." Fu Qingqing and the sapling looked at each other, unable to hide the surprise in their eyes. The two of them agreed and obediently walked towards the main hall of the Hongwen building. At that moment, Wanner suddenly saw a shadow of a person flying towards them from afar. The speed of the person was faster than a galloping horse. Wanner's heart skipped a beat. She hurriedly lifted her skirt and happily walked down the stairs. Tu, Shangguan hurried to the door to greet him. She had just called out one word when, under the illumination of the 2 rows of lanterns under the door of the Hongwen building, she suddenly discovered that the person who was flying over was not Yang Fan. Her heart thumped and she immediately stopped talking. Wanner's reaction was very quick. As soon as the word "tu" came out of her mouth, she realized that the person who came was not Yang Fan. Although she was shocked, she immediately changed her words. "Yang Fan, why are you in such a hurry in the middle of the night?" As it turned out, the person running for his life was the Guang Lu Shaoqing Yang Jun, who had abandoned Empress Wei and escaped. Yang Jun saw the 1,000 bull guards rush forward and excitedly cut down Empress Wei to the ground. He was scared out of his wits and immediately turned to run. He didn't dare to go back to the inner palace and ran towards the front hall. He knew that the palace doors were locked and he couldn't get out. He just unconsciously ran in a relatively safer direction. Only when he was near did he think of Hongwen building. In his view, Shanghai Wanner had been through 3 dynasties and had many eyes and ears in the palace. He didn't dare to say anything outside the palace, but inside the palace, she was a person of great power. In this mutiny, it would be difficult for her to escape. The 2 of them were grasshoppers on the same rope and could help each other out. Wanner had wanted to call out Erling, but luckily she reacted quickly and immediately called out Yang Fan. In his panic, Yang Jun thought that she had blurted out, "Ah!" and the shock on Wanner's face was definitely not fake, so he didn't suspect anything. For Wanner to be neatly dressed and standing at the door in the middle of the night was illogical, but at this time it made sense. The sounds of fighting could be heard here. As long as one wasn't sleeping too deeply, they would be able to hear it. Yang Jun saw Wanner. He hurriedly said, "Shengguan Jiarong, it's not good. The 1,000 cavalry, flying cavalry, and 1,000 bull guards have all rebelled. The Empress has already been killed, and the soldiers are burning and killing everywhere. Let's quickly escape." Ah, how could it be like this? Wanner turned pale with fright and said in a trembling voice, "The Empress has been killed? What should we do? Who is rebelling? Yang Jun smiled bitterly and said, Things happened in a hurry. Yang still doesn't know who is rebelling. Let's first escape from the palace and then discuss. Escape from the palace? How can we escape? Wanner's face was full of difficulty. She furrowed her brows and thought hard. In Yang Jun's eyes, Shangguan Jiarong was anxious and worried. Naturally, she was thinking hard of a way to escape. He didn't know that Wanner was secretly complaining and didn't know how to get rid of this uninvited guest. It was difficult for Wanner to send him away if she randomly pointed out a place for him to escape to. But she refused to leave. Yang Jun would most likely guess that she was also a member of the rebels. Besides, she didn't have any place to point him to. In a while, Yang Fan would arrive. No matter how stupid Yang Jun was, he would understand the role she played in this coup. At that time, it would be very dangerous. Or she would be held hostage by Yang Jun. What should she do? Yang Jun was at his wit's end. He had already placed all his hopes on Shangguan Jiarong. Seeing her pacing back and forth, her expression fluctuating, Yang Jun couldn't help but ask anxiously, Jiarong has no way? Shanghai Wanner suddenly had an idea. She raised her head and said to Yang Jun, Yang Shaoqing, please come with me. Inside Hong Wenguan, Xu Xiaomiao and Fu Qingqing were secretly worried. Suddenly, they saw Wanner hurriedly walk in with a man following closely behind her. Looking closely, they couldn't help but be shocked. Although this person was also surnamed Yang, he wasn't Yang Fan. Fu Qingqing and Xu Xiaomiao looked at each other and thought, what is going on? Could it be that after all this, Zhao Rong isn't going to elope with General Yang, but with this Guanglu Shaoqing? Zhao Rong and General Yang even had a child. When did she get together with this Guanglu Shaoqing? The two girls were confused and looked at Wanner with a strange gaze. Wan didn't have time to pay attention to them. She just walked quickly to a row of bookshelves. There were more than 200,000 books in the hall, and they filled up the bookshelves. There were boxes on the ground. Inside were some books that had been borrowed, returned, or had just been collected and hadn't been organized yet. Wanner casually opened a box and said to Yang Jun, Yang Shaoqing, quickly take out the paintings inside. You can hide inside. Hearing this, Yang Jun was immediately suspicious. I hide in a box? What about you, Zhao Rong? Wanner calmly said, No matter who wants to rebel, they are plotting for the world. Wanner is a woman and harmless, and the new dynasty has just been established. The system and etiquette will inevitably need Wanner. Perhaps I can deal with it. Yang Jun originally didn't want to hide in a box. He felt that once he did, he would be at the mercy of others and wouldn't be able to fight back. Hearing Wanner's words, he became even more worried. He coldly said, If that's the case, how do I know that Zhao Rong won't betray me? Wanner sullenly said, Wanner's life or death depends on whether the rebels want to use Wanner. You, Yang Shaoqing, don't have that much weight. Betraying you will allow Wanner to live. Wanner is only helping you to leave a path of retreat. If Steward Wei can reverse the situation, you can also prove Wanner's innocence. Why be so suspicious? Yang Jun saw that Wanner was angry and hurriedly smiled. Shangguan Jiarong, please forgive me. This Yang is like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. I can't help but be paranoid. If my words have offended you, please forgive me. However, it really isn't appropriate for me to hide in a box. Wanner angrily said, This isn't appropriate, that isn't appropriate. What do you want? Wanner doesn't have the strength to truss a chicken and has nowhere to go. She can only sit and wait for the Prince of Xiang's will. The chaotic army will arrive soon. Yang Shaoqing, do not harm me. Let him run for his life. Yang Jun said, There's nowhere to run. This Yang can only gamble this once. In the end, I still need to borrow Zhao Rong's strength. However, this Yang really can't follow the method of hiding in a box. Why don't we do this? Yang Fan turned from the right Yanming gate to the great literature hall. When he thought about Enli's death, he couldn't help but sigh. When he arrived at the great literature hall, he saw that the palace lanterns were hung high and the main door was wide open. It was quiet, and there was no sign of activity. He couldn't help but wonder. Warner is a little too calm. The palace is already in an uproar, but she still hasn't come out to visit? Yang Fan grew suspicious and became a little more cautious. Taking a deep breath, he charged into the great literature hall. Creak! Yang Fan pushed open the door. His eyes flashed as he saw 4 figures. Before he could lock onto Warner's charming face, he heard Warner's surprised voice. Great General Yang, why are you here? Just what has happened in the palace? Yang Fan's heart instantly sank. At this juncture, Warner would never be in the mood to joke around with him. For her to say this, something must have happened. Yang Fan looked over and immediately found something strange. The nervousness in Warner's expression was not feigned. When she met his gaze, Warner very skillfully gestured to him, as if telling him to look behind her. Yang Fan's gaze immediately swept behind her. There were 3 people standing behind Warner. He recognized 2 of them, Fu Qingqing and Xu Xiaomiao. The other person was slightly taller than Fu Qingqing. She stood with her head bowed. Because there was only 1 lamp in the room and it was placed in a corner, the light was dim. It was impossible to see her appearance clearly. There's something wrong with this person. Yang Fan's heart jumped. He slowly walked forward and pretended to say, Shengguan Jiarong, to tell you the truth, Empress Wei committed regicide in order to seize the throne. We were ordered by the Prince of Xiang, who assists the government, to execute the Wei, clique tonight, and restore Li Tang. The general situation has already been decided. Shanghai Warner let out an ah in shock, but a happy smile appeared on her face, completely at odds with the shock in her voice. It was a pity that Yang Fan was standing behind her and had no way of noticing. Yang Fan continued, Zhao Rong has been in charge of managing Chenhan. Most of the military and state edicts have come from Zhao Rong. His Highness, the Prince of Xiang, holds her in high regard. After the clouds are dispelled and the sun is seen, he will assuredly place Zhao Rong in an important position. Thus, Yang was sent here in advance to guard against any harm from the rebels. As Yang Fan spoke, he approached Shanghai Warner, wanting to suddenly restrain the unfamiliar palace maid behind her. However, the palace maid seemed rather timid and quietly hid behind Warner. She was too close to Shanghai Warner. Yang Fan was not confident that he could strike without harming Warner. Yang Fan's heart was filled with hatred. I was about to hold Warner's hand and roam the Jianghu. How could something like this suddenly happen? Just who is this person? Has Warner been restrained by her? Chapter 1201. Although Warner was anxious, she still had to brace herself and continue acting. She thanked Yang Fan. I am indebted to the Prince of Xiang's love and care. Warner is moved to tears and will naturally serve the Prince of Xiang. Does Warner wish to go with General to pay a visit to the Prince of Xiang? Yang Fan replied. The Prince of Xiang is currently overseeing the palace and commanding the extermination of the Wei clan rebels. There is no need for Zhaorong to be anxious. It won't be too late to pay a visit to the Prince of Xiang after daybreak. Yang Jun stood behind Warner with his head lowered. Hearing this, he couldn't help but sigh in relief. At this moment, he was wearing one of Fu Qingqing's palace robes. His hair was tied up in a woman's style, his lips painted in vermilion, and his face powdered. He was disguised as a palace maid. Yang Jun had an extremely handsome appearance, and under the lantern light, he looked like a beauty, though the lines of his face were a little more robust. He was much taller than Fu Qingqing, but when he bent his knees, it was impossible to see under his skirt. Although Yang Jun's idea was bold, it was the only method he could accept. He could not accept hiding in a chest and leaving it to fate. Moreover, he did not believe that Warner, in the face of imminent disaster, would do all she could to protect him, who had no family or friends. He felt much safer disguising himself as a palace maid and standing guard at Warner's side. When he calmed down and thought about it, Warner, as the Minister of Internal Affairs, had no authority in the outer court. Her authority came entirely from the emperor, so whenever a dynasty changed, the new emperor could use her without worry. As long as the rebels gave Shangguan Jiarong preferential treatment, he could temporarily live here. Who would pay attention to a palace made at Shangguan Jiarong's side? Even if his guess was wrong, it was just a gamble to the death. From what Yang Fan had said, the Prince of Xiang truly did intend to recruit Shangguan. If Chief Steward of the Chang'an army, Wei Wen, could reverse the situation, he could still mingle in the court. If Wei Wen also failed, he could take advantage of the chaos to leave the palace. Wanner saw that Yang Jun was closely following her. She was truly anxious, but she did not dare to show it. If Yang Jun noticed that something was wrong, he would definitely take the risk. She, Fu Qingqing, and Xu Xiaomiao were all women who did not know martial arts. If Yang Jun suddenly attacked, the consequences would be hard to predict. Therefore, Wanner could only delay and create an opportunity for Yang Fan. She said, "If that is the case, General, please come in and sit." The two of them entered the room and sat down. Wan pretended to ask him about the situation in the palace. At this time, Yang Fan did not hide anything and told her the truth of the coup. At the same time, he was secretly looking for an opportunity. Unfortunately, Yang Jun had been standing behind Wan and did not leave her side. Yang Fan did not know where to start. Just as he was feeling helpless, Li Longji led his bodyguards to the entrance of Hongwen Building. Lu Youqiu took a few steps forward and loudly announced, "The Prince of Linzi has arrived. Shangguan Jiarong, are you not going to welcome him?" Yang Fan thought to himself, "This is an opportunity." He quickly stood up and announced, "The Prince of Linzi is here. Zhao Rong can accompany me to welcome him." Wan stood up, but Yang Jun, disguised as a palace maid, did not leave her side. Yang Fan wanted to chase him away, but he is afraid that he will act in desperation. Since he knows that the Prince of Xiang values Wan, he might as well take her as a hostage. Yang Jun is also alert and guarded Wan other side, intentionally avoiding Yang Fan and refusing to let him come near. When Empress Wei took Yang Jun as a gigolo, Yang Fan had already left the court and did not recognize him. Even if Yang Fan can recognize him, he does not know the extent of his martial arts. While Yang Fan is fully focused on Wan, he dared not take the risk to attack. Seeing that there is still no opportunity to attack, Yang Fan did not make a sound and accompanied Wan out of Hongwen Building. When Li Longji saw Shanghai Wan, a strange expression appeared on his face. When he first heard that this talented woman has an affair with great General Yang, he was shocked beyond words. Now that he has seen her again, this feeling cannot be erased. He really cannot imagine how a woman who has lived in the palace for a long time can maintain a relationship with Yang Fan. Thinking of his little sister Chiaying's deep love for Yang Fan, Li Longji's expression became even more strange. Ever since Shanghai Wan came out, Lu Youqiu has been observing Li Longji's expression. He wants to ascertain whether Li Longji wants to kill or recruit Shanghai Wan. Since he was appointed as Li Longji's strategist, he instinctively wanted to figure out his superior's intention to please this young and promising prince. In the end, when Shanghai Wan gracefully prostrated herself in front of this young prince, Li Longji's expression became inexplicably strange. It does not look like he has a murderous aura and does not look like he thinks highly of her. Instead, his eyes are seriously assessing Wan. Lu Youqiu's heart skipped a beat and a bold idea popped into his head. Could it be that Prince has feelings for Shangguan Jiarong? Lu Youqiu subconsciously looked at Shanghai Wan. Her figure is lithe and graceful, her features pretty. Her facial features and posture are actually maintained as a 20-year-old girl. It is said that men who lost their mothers at a young age are usually in love with older and more beautiful women. Could it be that Prince Lu Youqiu secretly muttered to himself? Shanghai Wan gracefully prostrated herself and greeted. Subject Shanghai Wan, pays her respects to Prince Lin Zi. Li Longji recalled his earlier agreement with Yang Fan. His face turned solemn, and he coldly questioned, "Which crime are you guilty of?" Shanghai Wana lowered her head and replied, "Empress Wei is in power and has committed perverse acts. All the edicts were issued by Wan Er. Wan Er is a traitor and has let down the late emperor's expectations. This is a serious crime." Lu Youqiu guessed that he has already understood Li Longji's intentions. From his expression, it does not look like he is truly angry. He thought that he has guessed Li Longji's true intentions. Prince is using his authority to subdue Shangguan Zhaorong. Thinking about this, Lu Youqiu hurriedly stepped forward and pleaded, "Prince, please do not be angry. Shangguan Zhaorong is only drafting the edicts according to Her Majesty's wishes. Although the edicts are issued by Shangguan Zhaorong, they are in fact from Her Majesty. From this subject's point of view, Shangguan Zhaorong's crime is not punishable by death. She can atone for her crimes by meritorious deeds." Li Longji coldly glared at him. Lu Youqiu quickly shut his mouth and thought, "Oh no, could I have guessed Prince's intentions wrongly?" When Yang Fan had been paying his respects to Li Longji, he had been secretly watching the palace made with the strange identity. At this time he could see that it was a man and guessed that one had been kidnapped. However, that person had also knelt along with Wan Er, and there was a small sapling between them. Yang Fan was not certain. What Yang Fan needed now was a chance to act. Seeing that person's defenses were tight, he said, "Prince, this subject has just chatted with Shangguan Zhaorong and understands Zhaorong's difficulties. Prince, please enter the room and take a seat of honor. This subject will report to you one by one." Li Longji raised an eyebrow and looked in surprise at Yang Fan. He thought, "What are you doing? Didn't you tell me to have Shangguan Zhaorong commit suicide for the crime of being a traitor to Wei the moment I see her? Now you want me to enter the room to discuss something?" Li Longji hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. He said to Lu Youqiu and the others, "You all wait here." He then walked towards Hong Wenguan. Yang Fan and Wan Er followed closely behind. Yang Jun also stood up. On his left was Fu Qingqing, and on his right was Xu Shaosao. They entered together. Yang Fan and Shangguan Wan Er followed behind Li Longji. As they entered the main hall and turned to their seats, Yang Fan's foot suddenly moved backward and touched the tip of Xu Xiaomiao's boot. His movement was hidden under his robe, and no one else could see it. Xu Xiaomiao was caught off guard and fell on his back with a cry of "Aya!" Yang Jun had been following closely behind Wan Er. As soon as Xu Shaosao fell, he was immediately alarmed. He turned his head and saw that Xu Shaosao had slipped and lost his footing. The energy that he had accumulated dissipated. Yang Fan took the opportunity to turn his head in surprise. His eyes were on Yang Fan. He saw Yang Fan's shoulder tighten and then relax. Taking advantage of the moment when his energy was dissipated, Yang Fan made a decisive move. He spun his body and fiercely punched towards Yang Fan's ribs. Yang Fan had been accumulating energy for a long time. Now that he had finally found an opportunity, how could he be merciful? He punched out and heard a kacha sound. Yang Jun was sent flying through the air by this punch. He fell more than 3 zhang away and hit a pillar before falling heavily onto the green brick floor. As soon as Yang Fan punched out, he couldn't stop himself from giving a muffled grunt. He felt the bones in his palm were about to crack. The pain was unbearable. He was shocked. Could it be that this fellow has practiced some kind of defensive martial arts like the Golden Bell Shield? Why is this punch like iron and stone? How could Yang Jun have such a high level of martial arts? His martial arts were admittedly not bad, but compared to Yang Fan, he was still far from it. The main reason Lu Binji chose him to enter the palace was because of his good looks. Lu Binji was not sure what kind of man Empress Wei would like, so he chose Ma Qingca, who didn't know any martial arts, but had an elegant and graceful bearing. He also chose the handsome and masculine Yang Jun. Lu Binji's skill was inferior to Yang Fan's, and he was bending his knees to conceal his height. When Yang Fan suddenly attacked, he had no way to dodge. However, even though Yang Fan's punch was fierce and could have broken at least 3 of his ribs, it shouldn't have sent him flying so far. However, he had a sharp blade hidden under his robe. Yang Fan's punch just happened to hit the blade. This punch was too tyrannical. It actually broke the blade, and the broken blade cut Yang Jun's ribs. Yang Jun was sent flying by the punch and hit heavily on the pillar before falling to the ground. With a wah sound, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He still wanted to struggle and hastily crawl up. He suddenly raised his head and saw a flash of cold light. Yang Fan seemed to be drawing his blade. A line of blood suddenly appeared between Yang Jun's eyebrows. Yang Jun stared blankly, and his head suddenly split into 2 halves. Seeing such a strange scene, Fu Qingqing screamed in fright and jumped back. Even Li Longji was shocked. What a fast blade! Cha! It seemed that Yang Fan's action of drawing his blade was actually putting it back into its sheath. Erlang! Wan cried tears of joy and threw herself into Yang Fan's embrace. This coup was completely different from the one in the Dragon God's coup. There was no response from the imperial court and no response from the palace. Ever since the Plum Blossom Guards were disbanded and expelled from the palace by Li Xian, it was impossible for Wan'er to keep an expert guard by her side even if she wanted to. Moreover, according to the plan, as long as Yang Fan and the others could successfully enter the palace, he would immediately rush over. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? Seeing that she was about to get rid of this identity and no longer have to be accompanied by official documents, henceforth she would support her husband and teach her children, living a happy life. How could one not be afraid of this sudden change? It was only at this moment that she felt relieved. After throwing herself into Yang Fan's embrace, she was already crying tears of joy. In the courtyard, Lu Yochio heard a cry of surprise from inside and couldn't help but be shocked. "Quick, protect the royal prince!" Then he led his men and rushed inside. Li Longji had already understood something, but he was afraid that more people would know about Wan'er and Yang Fan, so he immediately shouted, "Guard outside!" After shouting, Li Longji frowned and said to Yang Fan, "Grand General, what is going on?" Li Longji's shout stopped Lu Yochio. Lu Yochio was full of doubts, but he didn't dare to disobey. After about the time it takes for 2 incense sticks to burn, Li Longji slowly walked out of Hongwen and said lightly, "Shengguan clan attach themselves to Wei clan. Their crime cannot be pardoned. They have already been executed. Collect her corpse." Lu Yochio was shocked. He didn't expect Li Longji to be so decisive in killing. His heart trembled and he respectfully complied. When he walked into the hall, he saw a pool of blood on the floor, and a corpse had already been wrapped in a straw mat and tied up properly. Yang Fan stood at the side and comforted Fu Qingqing and the other 3 palace maids. "You don't have to worry, the royal prince only executes the main culprit. He won't implicate the innocent. Come with me. Once the palace is settled, you can go or stay as you please." Lu Yochio waved his hand and said, "Someone come and carry the corpse away." 2 imperial guards responded and went to carry the straw mat. One of them moved it up, and a pair of big feet appeared in the straw mat, wearing men's boots. Lu Yochio was shocked and quickly shouted, "Stop!" Lu Yochio turned his head and looked at the 3 palace maids who were following behind Yang Fan. He saw one of them walking quickly with her head lowered. That posture seemed Lu Yochio didn't dare to make a sound, and quickly turned his head back, thinking, as expected, the royal prince is interested in Shengguan Jarong. This time, Shengguan Jarong will probably have to change her name and be taken by the royal prince as a concubine to fill the inner palace. Lu Yochio hurriedly went to the window and pulled down 2 curtains, blocking the head and tail of the mat. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief, thinking, "Oh, that Jioi of mine is a young and beautiful widowed woman." Since the royal prince has this kind of hobby, why don't I find a chance to introduce her? Chapter 1202. At a quarter to the second watch, Gu Fuxin killed Wei Bo, Wei Zhuo, and Gao Chong. At the same time, Chu Kuanga and Ma Qiao of the 10,000 cavalry camp attacked Wei Xian and Wei Jie, taking control of the flying cavalry and the 10,000 cavalry. At the third watch, the 10,000 cavalry and the flying cavalry simultaneously set out for the palace. The flying cavalry attacked Xuande Gate, the 10,000 cavalry attacked Jiao Gate, and Li Longji moved from the Forbidden Garden to Xuanwu Gate. At the fourth watch, Empress Wei and Lu Wuyanxiu and Shanghai Wana were beheaded, and Li Longji moved to Taiji Palace. Soon after, the purge of the Wei clan's faction began throughout the city. The Crown Prince's Grand Protector, the third rank of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, and the Chief Steward of the Chang'an Army, Wei Wen, jumped over the wall when his front and rear gates were attacked at the same time. He fled in panic to the north gate of the East Market, where he was shot to death by his pursuers. Chu Ku of the Hall of Governmental Affairs took advantage of the night to escape from his home. He disguised himself as a peddler and led a donkey to hide in a small alley. At daybreak, he snuck out of the alley with the intention of escaping from Chang'an through Tunghua Gate. In the end, because he had too much gold and silver in his pouch, he was discovered by the imperial guards of the southern Yamen and beheaded on the spot. Zhong Jinqing, Zhao Wen, and the other Wei clan members were all beheaded in their homes. Prime Minister Wei Jiyuan, who was already 80 years old, was also assassinated by the flying cavalry on the middle steps of his mansion because he was affiliated with the Wei clan. The chief secretary Li Yong had married Empress Wei's widowed sister, and the imperial censor Dou Fengyi had married Empress Wei's wet nurse. They usually boasted about this to others, but when they heard of the shocking change in the palace and Empress Wei's execution, they decisively killed their wives and rushed to the Prince of Xiang's estate with their heads, hoping to survive. By daybreak, the purge in the city was nearing its end. Assistant Minister of War Cui Riong, in order to express his loyalty to the Prince of Xiang, sent troops out of the city to kill the Wei clan of Fanchuan. The Wei clan of Fanchuan and Empress Wei originally had nothing to do with each other, but after Empress Wei took power because her maternal family was sparse, in order to strengthen her maternal relatives, she sought kinship with the Du clan of Fanchuan. The Du clan of Fanchuan and the Empress were more than happy to have the same clan as each other. But who could have expected that it would plant the seeds of disaster for the clan? Wherever Cui Riong's army went, not even the babies in swaddling clothes were spared, and all of them were slaughtered. Fanchuan's Du family and Wei family's mansions were adjacent to each other, so he was mistaken for a member of the Wei family by the confused soldiers who wandered around Wei family's mansion. They also mistakenly killed a lot of people, which made Du Jingting want to cry but have no tears. In the end, Li Longji was still young, and he wasn't as mature as Zhang Jinji and the others. He hadn't killed many people in the Dragon God's coup last time, and the heads hanging on Vermilion Bird Avenue were only the 5 Zhang brothers. This time, however, he had killed so many people that blood flowed like a river. However, this was also normal. When Zhang Zhenji and the others rebelled because Wu Zetian was bedridden, the officials had long been disloyal. Many people in the court and the army had responded, and the Li and Wu families had all participated. The relationship between the court officials was complicated, and it was really not good to start a massacre. But this time it was different. The Wei family had already occupied the entire court, and the loyal officials were all gone. This time, Li Longji didn't have any support in the court or the palace for his rebellion. Even his father was kept in the dark. Those who participated in the coup this time were a bunch of hawkish officers and hot-blooded men. They held the mentality that the winner was king, and the loser was in the wrong. Since they had succeeded, they could only carry out a massacre to purge the old party and meet the political needs of building a new dynasty. It was just that once the plan was implemented, the subordinates would always flatter their superiors even more, and in the end, the scale of the purge far exceeded the intentions of the initiators. The cruelty of this great purge was far worse than what Li Longji wanted. Most of the officials lived in the northern and eastern parts of the city, and their mansions were adjacent to each other. When they saw the bloody massacre, they couldn't help but be terrified. As a result, when it was time for morning court, although the officials who were lucky enough to survive gathered at the palace, they only knelt in fear. Not a single one of them dared to enter the palace. If the officials couldn't attend court today, it would be a big mess. If the news spread, how could the world believe that this coup was a righteous move that conformed to the will of heaven and the will of the people? Li Longji panicked and hurriedly sent people to urge them again and again, promising that they would be safe. However, the officials were still afraid and didn't dare to move. For a moment, Li Longji was also dumbfounded. Did he have to send troops to arrest them and bring them into the palace? That wouldn't be appropriate. There were countless people of Chang and watching outside. If the officials had to arrest them to go to court, they would still lose face. The capital was not like other places. In small places, a county magistrate could make the people tremble with fear. But the capital was an important place, and there were many civil and military officials. The people of Chang and were used to it, so they were not afraid. They all gathered there to watch the show. Only then did Li Longji realize that the massacre had gone too far. For a moment, he couldn't think of a way to comfort the officials. It was Lu Youqiu who came up with a plan. Why don't you go to the Prince of Xiang's residence and ask your father to come forward? The Prince of Xiang is a person of virtue and prestige. If he comes forward, the officials will definitely be reassured. Li Longji suddenly understood. At the beginning, he didn't want his father to come forward because he knew that his father was indifferent and didn't care for power. He was worried that his father wouldn't accept his nephew's abdication of the throne, so he wanted the officials to go to court and force Li Zhongmao to abdicate. Once this was established, he would lead the civil and military officials to welcome his father's ascension. Now that the situation was out of control, he could only ask his father to clean up the mess. The cavalry was like a dragon, escorting Li Longji straight to the Prince of Xiang's residence. There were more than 1,000 retainer knights. At this time, Chang'an was in turmoil. No one could guarantee that the remnants of the Wei clique could be completely purged in such a short time, so Li Longji naturally had to be especially careful about his safety. The front of the Prince of Xiang's residence was currently empty. There wasn't a single servant, and the cinnabar gate was tightly shut, not even a crack visible. 2 people were kneeling on the stone steps in front of the gate. One was Secretary Li Yong, the other was Imperial Censor Do Tsongi. The 2 of them had their heads bowed to the ground, not even daring to raise them. However, if one were to get a closer look, one would assuredly be shocked, because there was actually a head placed in front of each of them. The head in front of Li Yong had a head of black hair, although the head looked rather frightening when placed on the ground. If one looked carefully, one would realize that this head had been quite beautiful when she was alive. She was Empress Wei's younger sister. The head in front of Do Tsongi was that of a white-haired old woman, her face covered in wrinkles. This was Empress Wei's wet nurse, now more than 60 years old. Do Tsongi was only a little over 50. After his wife passed away, given his status, he could have married a beautiful woman. However, in order to curry favor with the Wei clan, he had actually taken Empress Wei's wet nurse as his wife, taking pride in it. Now that he was kowtowing to the ground, he didn't know if he regretted it or not. Empress Wei's party had already been slaughtered to pieces, but these 2 were lucky enough not to die. This was all because this was the Prince of Xiang's estate. Those who had been ordered to exterminate the remnants of the Wei clan's party did not dare to use weapons to kill in front of the Prince of Xiang's estate. When Li Longji was still several dozen zhang from the gate of the Prince of Xiang's estate, he dismounted and walked forward, accompanied by 10-some imperial guards. Upon hearing these footsteps, Li Yong and Do Tsongi did not dare to raise their heads, their bodies even lower. Li Longji ignored them and strode up to the gate of the estate. He picked up the brass beast collar and began to knock on it. After a while, the gatekeeper asked, "Who is knocking?" Li Longji loudly replied, "Quickly report to my father. Tell him that San Lang requests an audience." After a pause, the somewhat timid voice replied, "San Langjun, forgive me. Ah Lang already knows of San Longjun's actions. Ah Lang has declared that he will never see San Lang." Li Longji stared blankly for a moment, then loudly said, "Longji's actions are all for the sake of Li Tang's country. Go and report to my father. Tell him that San Lang has an important military matter and earnestly requests father to see him." This time, the gatekeeper's voice could be heard through the crack in the door. It seemed like he was trying to talk through the crack. The man humbly said, "San Langjun, Lang personally ordered that no matter what happens, he will not see you. San Langjun must not make things difficult for this lowly one. Lang is currently in a state of rage. This lowly one does not dare to reply." Li Longji clenched his teeth and suddenly turned around. He took 3 steps, then turned around and knelt down at the bottom of the stone steps. When the guards who had come with him saw this, they also hurriedly knelt down with him. Li Longji loudly said, "Father, San Lang has done great things and caused father to be unjust. This is San Lang's fault. No matter how father punishes him, San Lang is willing to accept the punishment. However, the traitor way has been eliminated and the entire world is watching. I hope that father can think of the country of our ancestors and come forward to maintain the situation. San Lang pays his respects here. If father does not see San Lang will not rise." There was still no movement from inside the door. Li Longji also acted up and knelt there without moving. After the time it takes for 3 incense sticks to burn, there was still no movement from the prince of Xiang's estate. However, there was a commotion at the end of the long alley. The imperial guards parted to the sides, opening a path for an ox carriage to slowly drive over. One of the guards, kneeling behind Li Longji, turned his head to look. When he saw the characters on the carriage, his expression immediately lit up. He hastily crawled 2 steps forward and whispered, "Your Highness, look! Princess Taiping is here." When Li Longji heard this, he could not help but be overjoyed. He turned his head, and sure enough, he saw 2 old oxen leisurely walking over, pulling a luxurious light carriage. The carriage stopped in front of the prince of Xiang's estate. The coachman jumped down and put down the steps. The carriage door opened, and Princess Taiping, dressed in splendid attire, gracefully like a tender and beautiful peony, slowly walked down from the carriage. Li Longji turned around and bowed his head, saying, "San Lang pays his respects to aunt." Princess Taiping gave him a slight nod. Without stopping, she ascended the stone steps and shouted towards the door, "I am Taiping and wish to see my royal brother. Open the door." Hurried footsteps could be heard from inside, presumably someone rushing inside to report. After a while, the hurried footsteps returned, and the gate of the prince of Xiang's estate opened with a bang. Li Dan, dressed in the robes of the Swallow residents, hurriedly came out to greet her. "Linghua, why have you come?" Princess Taiping saw that he had arrived, but ignored him. Instead, she turned around and raised her hand to help Li Longji up, amiably saying, "San Lang, please rise." Li Longji gazed at his father, not daring to rise. Princess Taiping glanced at her brother and coldly snorted. "Get up. Let's see if he dares to scold you." Li Longji hesitantly got up. Princess Taiping sternly said, "The survival of the clan is all thanks to you. If the spirits of my Li Tang's ancestors in the underworld will also be proud of you." Li Dan slightly frowned and grumbled, "Linghua, how can you shield him like this? This little brute is extremely daring. Your brother is annoyed at his recklessness, yet you still praise him." Princess Taiping glared at him and said discontentedly, Elder brother, if our Li family had a few more reckless people like him, we wouldn't have fallen to such a state today. Longji, this child, is more promising than you and me. Li Dan smiled bitterly. He could act like a father in front of his son, but in front of his younger sister who had cared for and sheltered him for many years, he did not have the slightest bit of confidence. Princess Taiping grabbed Li Longji's arm and said, "Come, let's go inside and talk." Princess Taiping did not allow any explanation. She grabbed Li Longji's arm and walked away. As soon as she stepped over the threshold, she looked back at Li Dan and teased, "What? Elder brother, as the master of this residence, is unwilling to come in?" Li Dan smiled bitterly and could only obediently follow in. Chapter 1203. Li Dan truly did listen to his twin sister Taiping. Taiping had been doted on by Wu Zetian since childhood and had a strong personality. Li Dan, on the other hand, had been cautious since childhood and had long since lost his edge. He found it difficult to refuse Taiping's insistence. In addition, Li Dan had been emperor for 8 years and crown prince for more than a decade. He had always been attacked and framed by the Wu clan, and it was all thanks to Princess Taiping's support. Li Dan was not a cold-blooded person like Li Xian. After receiving such kindness, he felt indebted and naturally could not be unyielding. Thus, under Princess Taiping's persuasion, Li Dan finally agreed to go to the palace and resolve the dilemma of the officials not daring to go to court. They quickly changed horses and left the Prince of Xiang's estate, entering the imperial palace through a side gate. When the Prince of Xiang saw young Emperor Li Zhongmao under house arrest in the Divine Dragon Hall, he first comforted his nephew and then went with him to the peaceful Fortune Gate to console the officials. Young Emperor Li Zhongmao stood on the walls and saw countless officials kneeling before him. He could not help but look in fear at his uncle Li Dan, completely forgetting what he had been taught. Seeing this, Li Dan could only sigh inwardly and repeat what he had been told. With each sentence Li Dan spoke, Li Zhongmao loudly declared, "Ministers, Empress Wei coveted the divine artifact and has been executed. I have nothing to ask of them. My subjects, please do not be too alarmed." Lu Youqiu whispered to Li Longji, "Prince, we should have the emperor publicly announce that Empress Wei killed Emperor Xian with poison. Only then can the verdict be sealed and there be no more doubts." Li Longji sighed softly and said with a wry smile, "My father's temperament. If it weren't for Aunt Taiping's persuasion, I'm afraid he would have cut himself off from the world and shut himself in to prove his innocence. How could I dare to ask for more?" Young Emperor Li Zhongmao spread his arms on the walls and loudly declared, "Many of the common people in the city have been harassed by the rebels. We are truly uneasy and have specially exempted the people of the city from taxes for half a year to recuperate. Ministers, you may enter the Golden Hall and discuss the affairs of the state." After Li Dan's death, young Emperor Li Zhongmao had been a puppet in Empress Wei's hands. The entire world knew of this. Now that Empress Wei had been executed and he had fallen into Li Longji's hands, he was still someone who could not make decisions. The officials would not believe him if he were to go to the city to appease them. But this time, the Prince of Xiang was accompanying him to ascend the city. Who was the Prince of Xiang? That was Li Longji's father. Just by standing there, he was a guarantee of his credibility, so the officials naturally didn't doubt him. Therefore, when Li Zhongmao issued the edict, the officials all felt at ease. They all expressed their gratitude and accepted the edict, standing in line and preparing to enter the palace. Seeing this, Li Longji's worried heart finally relaxed. This farce has finally come to an end. The next day afternoon, a small boat on Longqing Lake. Shanghai Wanner, wearing a bamboo hat and green clothes, was sitting on the side of the boat. She wasn't wearing any shoes or socks, and her trousers were rolled up. A pair of sparkling and beautiful jade feet were submerged in the clear lake water. She held a fishing rod in her hand, but her face didn't have the tranquility of a fisherman. Instead, she looked around with high spirits. Yang Fan, dressed in casual clothes, came out of the cabin. He jumped into the air and mischievously sat down next to her. The boat rocked, and Shanghai Wanner cried out and hurriedly leaned against the side of the boat. Once the boat stabilized, she rebuked him with a fist. Yang Fan smiled. "How is it? Suddenly leaving the imperial court and no longer wielding that imperial brush you used to rule the world. Are you used to it?" Shanghai Wanner took a deep breath of the fresh and free wind and cheerfully said, "This is the life I want." In Luoyang, it was only when I accompanied Empress Sitian to perch at the Dragon Gate that I occasionally had the chance to wander alone in the forest and enjoy a few moments of freedom. As she said this, she became a little sad. She gently leaned her head on Yang Fan's shoulder and stared at the blue lake in front of her. She softly said, "I was chained to the palace since I was born. It was like walking on thin ice or facing an abyss. When I grew up, I suffered from lovesickness. I missed my mother, my husband, and my daughter. It was rare to see them, and I couldn't live in peace. Until today, I finally have my freedom. Lang Jun, I like this kind of life very much." Yang Fan couldn't help but hug her tightly. He bathed in the warm sunshine with her, and his body and mind were warm. After a while, Yang Fan said, "Good. Then from now on, I will accompany you to travel around the world." Wanna looked back happily and smiled. "Really? If you are willing to stay in the imperial court, you will definitely get a great achievement. Are you willing to give it up?" Yang Fan blushed and said, "I have already given up." Wanner pursed her lips and smiled. "That can only happen when the world is at peace. I heard that in the morning court today, there were palace servants and eunuchs who wanted to make young Emperor Li Zhongmao's mother Empress Dowager and assist him from behind the curtains. Is there going to be another incident?" Yang Fan smiled and patted her back. "Ah, you've just left the imperial court, and you're already too lazy to think about politics. Do a bunch of palace servants and eunuchs have such guts? This is just one of Sanlang's tricks." Yang Fan stretched his back and said, "Li Sanlang's move forced the young emperor to immediately rebuke the suggestions and confess his innocence, thoroughly destroying the fantasies of some of the foreign officials. Moreover, he also borrowed the young emperor's hand to dismiss the subordinates of the princesses. With the exception of Taiping, all the princesses' government offices have been abolished." Wan Er's eyes flickered. She happily said, "This man is smart. He is extraordinary." Yang Fan agreed. "And he is decisive in killing, resolute and unyielding. The Prince of Xiang's sons are not just a little stronger than the sons of the previous emperor." Li Longji rode out of Princess Taiping's estate in high spirits. Li Longji and his subordinates discussed the matter. They all felt that they should strike while the iron was hot and directly support the Prince of Xiang as emperor. But the Prince of Xiang was already indifferent to fame and wealth, and even hated it. It would not be easy to persuade him. If there was anyone in the world who could persuade the Prince of Xiang to change his mind, it was Princess Taiping. So Li Longji once more visited Princess Taiping and obtained his aunt's promise. When he left the estate, Li Longji was filled with joy. "Stop! Who's there?" Chang, and had just experienced a period of turmoil and could not be considered peaceful. Thus, Li Longji had brought quite a few bodyguards with him to visit Princess Taiping. Although they could not compare to the imperial patrol, the bodyguards were still like wolves and tigers. Unexpectedly, just as they left Princess Taiping's house, a person suddenly rushed out of the gate. The bodyguards paled in fright, thinking that it was an assassin. They immediately unsheathed their swords and spears. "Don't attack! Don't attack! Royal Prince, I'm Maozhong, I'm Maozhong!" Li Longji did not panic. He reined in his horse, but when he suddenly heard that person shout, Li Longji couldn't help but raise his brow and yell, "Bring him over!" The bodyguards parted to the left and right, opening a path. The person who had been stopped immediately ran to Li Longji's horse, his face wreathed in smiles. "Royal Prince!" Li Longji had heard the voice just now and knew that it was Wang Maozhong. Now he saw that this person was dressed like a traveling merchant and had a pouch slung over his shoulder. Although his appearance was rather disheveled, wasn't it Wang Maozhong? Li Longji's thick brows shot up as he angrily said, "Bastard thing, you still dare to come back!" Wang Maozhong dropped to his knees and cried bitterly as he kowtowed. "Royal Prince, forgive me, Royal Prince, forgive me. This lowly one has always been timid, and it's not like Royal Prince doesn't know this. This lowly one has always had this problem, a rat's gall. But this lowly one has always been loyal to Royal Prince." Li Longji angrily scolded, "Since you've already left, why did you come back?" Wang Maozhong kowtowed as if he was pounding garlic. "Royal Prince, please understand, this lowly one is as timid as a rat. That day, when I saw that Zhong Xiaojing refused to open the door, I was so scared that my courage broke. I didn't know what to think, but I just ran away in a panic. But this lowly one has served Royal Prince since I was young and never thought of leaving Royal Prince. After I left, this lowly one also knew that I had done something wrong and didn't dare to go back to see Royal Prince. I also didn't know where to go, Royal Prince." Wang Maozhong's snot and tears flowed down his face, making Li Longji feel both angry and amused. He was also well aware of Wang Maozhong's timid nature, now that he was crying so sorrowfully and had obediently confessed to running away out of fear. Li Longji couldn't help but soften his heart. Wang Maozhong had been his companion since childhood, and Li Longji was also a person who valued friendship and righteousness. Thinking about how they had interacted with each other since childhood, especially when he had accompanied his father in being placed under house arrest in the Eastern Palace, he had suffered with him. Thinking about how Empress Wei's peaceful death of the late emperor was his good idea, Li Longji exhaled heavily and raised his horsewhip to fiercely whip him, causing Wang Maozhong to quiver. Li Longji scolded, "Get up! Are you trying to embarrass me on the street? I'll deal with you when we get back." When Wang Maozhong heard this, he was overjoyed. He knew that the royal prince had forgiven him. He hurriedly kowtowed 3 more times and crawled up, saying, "This lowly one is not worthy of royal prince's great use. I'm just a lowly person who leads the horse and follows the horse. As long as I can serve royal prince, I'll be happy." Li Longji snorted and laughingly scolded, "What a bootlicker!" He then whipped the horse and galloped away. Wang Maozhong hurriedly spread his legs and happily chased after the horses. But Mount Zhongnan, Lu family's villa. Shinmu slowly walked in with his hands behind his back. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he slowly walked out again. Lan Jinhai went up to greet him, saying, "Sect leader." Shinmu shook his head, saying, "The room is empty. This kid, he's quick to act." Lan Jinhai said, "Should we send out scouts to scout around?" Shinmu waved his hand, saying, "Since he is already considered failure, he must have a way out. If we send people to chase now, how can they catch up? Also, Empress Wei has just been executed, and the scouts from the court are out. We should not cause trouble now and attract the court's attention." He rubbed his chin and thought for a moment, saying, "This time his forces have all been lured out and captured in one fell swoop. He's the only one left. Even if he escapes, can he do any harm?" Shinmu snapped his fingers and confidently said, "This time we've killed quite a lot. Let's go and find Yang Fan to split the loot." The mountains were connected, the peaks were connected, the valleys were deep and cliffs were precipitous. The mountains were high and the roads were narrow. Lu Binji guarded the pass alone, wearing a green robe and bamboo hat. He stood on the majestic city gate tower at Tong Pass, looking in the direction of the ancient city of Chang'an. The wind fluttered his clothes, making him want to ride the wind. Ding Yu stood at the side, looking at him worriedly. Lu Binji gazed for a long time, his eyes flashing with a trace of ruthlessness, saying, "Chang'an, Shinmu, Yang Fan, one day I will return.